Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Happy Tuesday. Brian, we are now kind of in the bulk of our off-season content, and to keep us rolling here, we're breaking down Notre Dame's schedule today. It's been a hot topic of conversation throughout the offseason today. We're breaking it down by quarters, diving into the meat and potatoes of Notre Dame's 2026 football schedule.
Yeah, I'm excited about it, man. You know, we're as we mentioned last week or in yesterday, we're kind of officially kicking off our run to the season, right? Where we're gonna, we've done kind of post-spring analysis and we've done some other things, but we're really diving into sort of the intro to let's run this thing up, right? So today we're gonna kick off. We're going to kick off, obviously, the schedule breakdown. And then tomorrow, one thing we're going to do starting tomorrow is, in the past, we've done like full day breakdowns of an opponent. Spend all day on Wisconsin. And the numbers didn't do great because I don't know that people want to listen to 2 hours of talking about Wisconsin or whoever else. So what we're going to do is we're going to have it as part of our midweek rundown. We'll include an opponent each week and spend a little time on that opponent as part of our midweek rundown. So very, very much looking forward to that, Trevor, and we're kicking all that off this week. I'm excited. We started on the message board and the front page, the free front page at irishbreakdown.com. We started our sort of doing the same thing, right? We're kind of our rundown. We've done our quarterback position preview. We're releasing our player profiles. We're going to actually do a player profile on every player on the team and have it attached to the roster when the official roster comes out. So it's that time, Trev. It's like, okay, it's June 1st. You know what I mean? Well, now it's June 2nd, but yesterday is when we started it. June 1st is on a Monday. It couldn't have worked out more perfectly to say, let's drive into this, and get into these things. So I'm excited about it. We're going to, today we're going to talk about the schedule and no mailbag today. We're going to kind of just talk storylines and some intriguing aspects of the schedule, talk about it from a big picture standpoint. Then we're going to, as we always do, break it down by quarter. And have some fun with it, Trev. So, man, I'm ready to rock and roll. I know you are. Every day I'm like, all right, Trev, you ready before I hit start? And he's like, you know it. I'm always ready. I'm like, I'm going to keep asking because the day that I don't ask and just start, you're going to be like, dude, I wasn't ready yet. But Trev's always ready to go, man.
Especially when it comes to Notre Dame football. You guys know what it's about, and I'm ready to talk about Notre Dame's schedule today. And before we dive into the quarters, Brian, we're going to have a conversation around just the schedule as a whole. Talk about the biggest storylines surrounding the schedule and just break it down from a big picture, macro view. And like we've said on this show before, it's not a brutal schedule. We're not going to sit here and try to compare it to what Ohio State is playing this year, what South Carolina is playing this year. But there are some good tests along the way.
Exactly. For our boy Big. Yeah.
Yeah, without a doubt. But they will still have some tests along the way, and that's what we're going to focus on.
Yeah, what we're trying to do is try to give an honest assessment of the schedule and not do one of two things. One is just kind of jump on the bandwagon, the easy, lazy analysis of, you play a cupcake schedule. I was literally on a debate with a Miami guy. Nice guy. We had I thought, an entertaining debate. I thought he did a nice job representing his team, so I'm not trying to, throw shade at him, but, he just made the comment of Notre Dame plays a cupcake schedule. And I wanted to be like, bro, that's just that's lazy narrative stuff. That's not real analysis. Number one, the team you cover and you're here to defend is on the schedule. A team that beat your team last year is on the schedule. And so it's lazy. You'll read every time there's a top 25, you hear Notre Dame schedule. We never hear that about Indiana. We never hear that about Penn State. And Daly, yes, it was. But that's frustrating. At the same time, we're not going to try to convince you that this is actually a gauntlet. Just nobody knows it yet. It's actually Wisconsin's going to look like vintage Barry Alvarez, Wisconsin. And this is going to be the Mark D'Antonio era resurrected at Michigan State. And the Jim Harbaugh, David Shaw era is going to be resurrected at Stanford. And man, this is going to be the Donovan McNabb, Marvin Graves, Syracuse era is back, baby. We're not going to do that either. We're going to give you an honest assessment of the schedule, talk about teams that we think might be better, and then what they need to do, and then just talk about what rank the schedule. And this is the schedule you have. And one of the things that we're going to talk about is when your schedule is a one that is not you're going to be able to go 10-2 and have no problem, and you'll be the 5 seed. You got to handle business. And is the schedule set up for them to be able to handle business? We'll talk about the reasons why, and we'll talk about the reasons why it could be problematic in some areas. So we're going to have some fun today, Trev, and dive into this. But part one of the show is really going to be a look at sort of looking at it from a storyline standpoint. What are some of the, taking a dive into it. Like, so we'll get into the quarters, which is a little bit more nitty gritty. Then we'll do the individual team breakdowns, which obviously be even more, getting into the very specific aspects of teams. But this is going to be sort of the blimp view, right? We're talking sports, right? So I don't know. Do you remember was the blimp a thing during your sports fandom, or was that?
Yeah, 100%. It landed at the Elkhart Airport. We would drive by it. I would see it, man.
We're going to take the blimp view of the schedule today and really dive into some of the storylines, Trev. And to kick things off, it's like, look, the big picture about the schedule. This is a tougher schedule than a lot of the critics give, but this is not a gauntlet schedule, and it's one that Notre Dame needs to dominate. And whether that's 12-0 or 11-1, the reality is there's a couple teams that are going to give you some games. But by and large, if you're the team we think you should be, if you're a team that's going to make that kind of run, if you're a team that's going to, leave no doubt, so to speak, then this is the kind of schedule where you not only need to win all your games, maybe you can afford one loss. They're going to make the playoff at 11-1. That's not a question. The only question would be where are they going to be seated. But the question is more of, if you're the team we think you're going to be, you need to dominate this schedule, because it's not a vintage Lou Holtz 1989 schedule where at the end of the year they had to play 7 teams ranked in the top 15 during the season. It's not 2017 where Notre Dame played a schedule. I think, what was it, Trev? It ended up being 7 opponents in the regular season, ended up being ranked that season. It's not that kind of schedule. It's better than people may say. It could be a solid schedule, but I don't even foresee a scenario where, like, boy, this turned out to be a really tough schedule beyond the top. It's a very top-heavy schedule. After the top 4 teams, it's kind of like, I don't know what it is, but I think the top of it is what doesn't get talked about enough. In one breath, they'll say it's a cupcake schedule, and then in the same ranking analysis, you have 3 of their opponents ranked in the top 20. That's where people kind of lose me. It is top-heavy, but that top-heavy part is pretty challenging for Notre Dame.
Without a doubt. I also think it's telling that, like our friends over at FanDuel still have Notre Dame's over-under win total at 11.5 wins, with the top of their schedule looking like what it's going to look like. As you guys are going to find out, one of the things that I think is fascinating about Notre Dame's schedule is that there's going to be different kinds of tests each week, each quarter. And it's not just tests as in, the big name matchup that's going to draw tens of millions of views. There are going to be some matchups that are like, okay, this position group matchup is going to be interesting to help build towards playing BYU on the road, towards playing Miami at home, towards playing SMU on Senior Day, and then obviously into the postseason. But yeah, man, I'm with you. There's a lot of people who in the same breath will say that Notre Dame has a favorable schedule, and the only reason why we think they're going to be good is because of their cupcake schedule. And then proceed to list 3 of their opponents inside of preseason top 25s, and then name Navy as an honorable mention, and talk about how many, insane portal pickups that Wisconsin got, and talk about how Pat Fitzgerald could revitalize Michigan State. And so we're here to kind of dive into, like, what's the truth in between all of those things. This is one of my favorite shows that we do every single year.
Yeah, it is. And when you look at it, Trevor, and you start breaking down the opponents, here's some interesting aspects of the schedule. One is, for the first time in a few years, there's no new teams on the schedule. There's nobody on the schedule that they've never played before. Last couple of years, we've had multiple opponents that have been new to Notre Dame's schedule. Obviously, last year, Notre Dame had never played Arkansas before, which I still find just kind of wild, Trevor, because you think Notre Dame, Arkansas, if you're my age, you immediately think of, well, Lou Holtz coached at both of those teams. So in your head, there's like this automatic, well, yeah, of course they've played before, but no, they've never played before. Notre Dame and Boise State last year played for the first time ever, in history. So we've seen that for Notre Dame in several seasons. And then we've seen some opponents that they've played before in the regular season, but not often. You mentioned when we were talking off air, talking about, Texas A&M, and they hadn't played a whole lot. And in fact, it only played twice in the regular season before Notre Dame and Texas A&M played the last 2 years. So you had Tennessee State in 2023, first time Notre Dame has ever played an FCS opponent. So Northern Illinois, I believe, was the first time that Notre Dame had ever played Northern Illinois. I kind of looking back, I kind of wish maybe they wouldn't have played Northern Illinois, but it is what it is. But it's like handled all them ranked teams and them freaking MAC teams
bro.
they're a problem, man. And and I believe Marshall in 2022 is the first time they'd ever played Marshall in a game at home, regular season or postseason. So I believe, Trevor, except for, well, actually, no, because the FCS opponent. And every year of Marcus Freeman's tenure, there's been a new team on the schedule. This year, it's 12 teams that they've got history with. Not everybody they have a long history with, but there's teams they've played. And like Rice, they played Rice 5 times. Now, I remember the one, I looked at that when they, back in 2014, when they kicked the season off with Rice. I remember thinking, like, well, I don't know if they've ever played Rice before. And then I went and looked at their history and like, wow, they've played 4 times. And then, oh, that's right, they played in 88. And then they played in 74, 73, and then again in 1915. So, yeah, it's going to be fun to kind of dive into it, Trev. But the other thing that I thought was interesting was I get this sense like, man, all the rivalries are off of Notre Dame's schedule. That's what people say. There's no USC, there's no Michigan. But when you look at it, Trevor, half the schedule is made up of Notre Dame rivals. A lot of them longtime rivals. So there's actually a much more Notre Dame versus its rivals feel. 6 teams on your schedule are considered in some form or fashion a Notre Dame rival to varying degrees.
When I saw that on the outline and you sent it over to me, I was like, what are you talking about, man? I was like, what rival? I was like, what is Rice a rival now? Like,
Yeah.
what are we doing? And then I started diving through it, and you're absolutely right. I think one of the reasons why the stigma around it is that there's no rivalries is none of them are like, outside of Miami, none of them are like those bitter rivalries where, Michigan is, they don't like us, we don't like them. You don't have a USC on there, battle for the jeweled shillelagh, the transcontinental rivalry. I forgot which one that I called it. But transcontinental rivalry.
Yes.
Intersectional rivalry is the correct one. I know that now. But it doesn't have any of those on there because a lot of those rivalry, like even Pitt, with Pat Narduzzi's comments, and we know that Notre Dame and Pitt have played each other amongst some of the most in Notre Dame's program's history, and there's not a lot of those on there. But to your point, Brian, there's a lot. You have Navy on there, Purdue, Michigan State, Stanford, Miami, and Boston College.
Mm-hmm. When you look at it, Trevor, 3 of Notre Dame's 4 most all-time teams they've played all time, 3 of the top 4 that they've played all time are on this year's schedule. They've played nobody in history more than they've played Navy. They're number 1. USC's number 2. They're not on schedule. Purdue is 3rd. Michigan State is 4th. So, that's where I think sometimes rivalry is turned into, like you had said, it's like, oh, it's the team you hate, that kind of thing. It's like, well, I guess that part of that depends on your era. I've always said I'd rather play Michigan State every year than Michigan. Now, Purdue I've never viewed as like a rivalry in the sense of Michigan, but it's an in-state rivalry. Like, there is some matchup to it. And then Stanford, is more of a modern rival. And for a good chunk of Brian Kelly's tenure, they were a dominant rival, not just dominant nationally, but dominant over Notre Dame. Brian Kelly lost to Stanford in 10, 11, 13, 15, 16, and 17 before Stanford stopped being good at football. And then Notre Dame started to dominate at that point in time. But, they're 9th. You've played them 9th most all time. Miami, as you mentioned, is the heated rival, but they're 13th all time on the schedule. So it's like it's not even this team they've played 100 times, but it's when they've played, it's been memorable. And then, of course, Boston College is 14th, not a team they've played a ton, but a team that you can absolutely consider a rival when you consider, Jesuit and Catholic and gold helmets and just, some of the upsets that Notre Dame has suffered at the hands of Boston College and some of the great games they've played. So I was surprised how much rivalry flavor there is in the schedule. And I think what it comes down to, why we often lose that, it's not so much the bitterness part, it's the fact that they're just not good other than Miami and Navy. Like if Michigan State was good, if they were coming off like a 2021 season where they went 11-2, I think there'd be a lot more buzz about Michigan State's back on the schedule. If Boston College was still good, we'd be having a conversation about, man, November games against BC have had a bad memory. Let's consider that one. And you just don't see that. And I think that's the thing that takes a little bit of the shine away from the fact that there are so many rivals on the schedule this year. 6 rivals, 3 of the 4 teams you've played more than anybody else are on the schedule this year.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It's the outlook of their programs, not necessarily just the rivalry that kind of dims the light a little bit. But nonetheless, they are playing a lot of rivals on this year's schedule, and it's something I'm looking forward to seeing. But when you start talking about the makeup of Notre Dame's schedule, Brian, and you talk about what this means for Notre Dame specifically, you start talking about the Notre Dame offense, you start talking about the Notre Dame defense, which kind of poses a question when you look at the schedule, all 12 games encompassing. Who gets tested more, the Notre Dame offense or the Notre Dame defense? I think that's a fascinating conversation as well.
And we've had these conversations a lot over the years, Trev, where we've kind of looked at and been like, hey, how is this team going to be? How is this group going to be? And we've broken down the schedule, and we've talked about how, this year the defense is going to get tested a lot, or the offense is going to get tested a lot. And I think that's more up for grabs this year than it has been in recent years, because there's a lot more what ifs with the schedule than we've seen in the past. And how will these teams be? So, for example, if you look at it and say, boy, the Notre Dame rush offenses or rush defense is not going to be tested this year. You've got Navy, who was ranked number 1 last year. You've got Rice, who was ranked number 15, but like they lost a bunch of dudes, from their roster last year that were a big part of that. And, we'll pretend for a second we don't know the guys that are coming back, but you say, okay, well, I mean, how are they going to be? And you look, the next highest ranked rushing team on the schedule is BYU at 40. There's one, so Wisconsin, Michigan State, Purdue, North Carolina, Stanford, and Boston College and Syracuse, 70 or 12 opponents ranked in the 100s. And SMU was 95. Miami was 77. You think, well, they're not going to be tested. But then you're like, well, hold on a second. That's why Wisconsin went out and got Colton Joseph. And that's why Michigan State went out and got, I'm going to pull it up here real quick, but I'm trying to remember the name of the kid that they got. But they got a kid that was a 1,200-yard rusher last year. And so that's one of the things we'll talk about here in a little bit. But I think that's a bit of an unknown. On paper, I would argue that the Notre Dame offense is going to get tested more than the Notre Dame defense, because if you look at last year, but that's based on last year, Miami had an elite defense that ranked in the top 5 scoring. They ranked number 6 overall in rushing. They were a big time sack team. But this year, Miami, I think there's a chance it could be flipped a little bit, where the offense could look more like it did in 2024, and the defense could look maybe not quite as good. So I think those are the things that I look at, Trev, and say, I'm not quite sure, how these teams are going to be. SMU didn't run the ball very well last year, but I think they made some additions to their roster this season that could lead to them being a much better football team. It was Cam Edwards, by the way. I keep forgetting the kid's name. Cam Edwards from UConn, who had 1,200 yards rushing last season and 15 touchdowns for a UConn team that won 9 games last season. So, that's who Michigan State went out and got. And, we'll see how he performs. And in that new look unit, they got KK Smith, from Notre Dame, who you and I are high on as a player, gives them some speed. So that's the thing is, Trev, is I'm not quite sure which side of the ball is going to get tested more. But I think one thing I'll say is I think the rushing attack for Notre Dame on both sides of the ball on paper is going to face a tougher test than what we're going to see from the pass game on either side, just based on last season and what teams have done in recent seasons. And I think that's going to be a very interesting piece to this whole thing.
My gut feeling after diving into the rosters of every team and figuring out who comes back and who brings back who and the makeup of either side of the ball for all 12 of Notre Dame's opponents, I'm willing to say I'm going to predict that I think that the defense is going to face a tougher challenge this year, because I think that the highest ceiling of offenses and the diversity of offenses that they're going to face will provide more of a unique challenge for the defense than what it will for the offense. And so, like, when I'm looking at it on paper, I think, the best team on their schedule right now is Miami. And to your point, I think Miami's offense is going to be better than Miami's defense this year, has the potential to be. So I could see Notre Dame's defense having more of a challenge this year. But if we're going to be breaking it down into like rushing offense versus rushing defense or passing offense versus passing defense, I think that's where that conversation gets a lot more even.
And I think the challenge when having this conversation, Trevor, is a lot of the reasons that you think that the offense or the opposing offenses are going to be better than opposing defenses, and I tend to agree with you, is because of the portal additions, especially at quarterback. And that's the thing that when I look at it, why I think the rush offense and rush defense are going to end up getting challenged a little bit more is exactly that, because you're seeing, especially early on in the season, and we can dive more into it when we get to, specifically looking at quarter one. But when you look at the schedule for this season, for example, the first couple opponents on the schedule are teams that went out and got portal quarterbacks that are pretty mobile players. Obviously, Wisconsin last year struggled running the football. They ranked 116th in college football last year running the football. So they went out and made changes. They went out and got Colton Joseph from Old Dominion. They went out and got Abu Sama from Iowa State, who's a kid that's going to come in with over 1,800 career rushing yards and 13 career rushing touchdowns. And Michigan State went out and got a 1,200-yard running back that's a really good football player. Rice went out and got Ja'Curry Brown, as being talked about in the chat, who's a really talented dual threat quarterback from Miami. Quentin Jackson comes back for them. DeAndre Hardiman comes back for them, and that was a team that ranked 15th in the country last year in rush defense, or rushing offense. So I think that's kind of part of it too, Trevor. Is I think that right now I would argue, and we'll find out if we're correct or not, but I would argue that the opposing teams did better recruiting portal players on offense this year than they did defense this year. Purdue's another example. They had a really nice underrated portal class at receiver, for example. So I think that's something that adds a little bit of something to it, Trevor. But at the end of the day, in some of this stuff with all these opponents, we're kind of guessing. And we're projecting a lot because they're so many of the teams that Notre Dame has played this year, are playing this year, in a lot of ways, Trev, they were completely rebuilt through the portal. And at the end of the day, that's going to be a big storyline about Notre Dame's schedule. Like, not the Notre Dame piece, but just how good teams are going to be. Who did better in the portal? We're not going to necessarily break it down. We'll just kind of talk about some of the guys we like. But at the end of the day, that's going to determine whether or not these teams are successful. Wisconsin's got brand new quarterback, brand new running back, brand new tight end, 2 starting offensive linemen, and their entire depth chart at receiver, like beyond the starters, are backups, are portal guys. They had over like about a dozen new pickups on defense through the portal. It's funny. One of the teams that had the least amount of new portal additions is Rice. Michigan State, over half their starters on both sides of the ball are likely going to be portal guys. Purdue has a ton of portal guys on both sides of the ball. North Carolina has a pretty good portal class, but they actually have a decent number of guys coming back, depending on who wins starting jobs. But there's a chance that not even half their starters are going to be portal guys. Obviously, Stanford doesn't have a lot of portal guys. You look at BYU, they don't have a lot of portal guys, but they've got some portal guys that have a chance to be impactful. We'll talk about some of those. I know there's a guy that you're talking about, and then there's one that I want to be talking about. And so I think that's going to be a big piece of this is who wins the portal battles on Notre Dame's schedule. That's going to go such a long way towards determining how good some of Notre Dame's opponents are going to be. And that's partly why, like, you and I are higher on Wisconsin than maybe some other people, because there's some of those portal pickups we really like. We think can add something to that roster. Like, they were just terrible at quarterback the last couple of years. Terrible, Trev. And now it comes down to, like, okay, well, we'll see how good they're going to be. But man, I'm actually optimistic that they've got a shot to turn some things around, because we really like some of those portal pickups, especially quarterback. And it's like, they were not a very good team the last 2 years, but they were competitive in a lot of games. They were competitive, and they were competitive with terrible quarterback play. What are they going to do with Colton Joseph at quarterback? I'm actually looking forward to seeing that.
I think because of all the transfer portal transactions this offseason, it's made it really hard to gauge what Notre Dame's schedule is going to look like past the top 4. Even with portal acquisitions, man, we have a pretty good idea that Miami's still going to be good, BYU's still going to be pretty good, SMU's going to be pretty good, and then Navy under Brian Newberry has shown that they have the ability to stack double-digit win seasons year over year. Past that, however, it's a lot of like we said at the start of this, we have to be able to look at both sides here and live somewhere in the middle. Will it be as bad as it looks after the top four? I have no idea. It's a lot of projection. What we do know is we can look at their portal transactions, and then we can also look at what they did last season. Between Wisconsin, Rice, Michigan State, Purdue, North Carolina, Stanford, Boston College, and Syracuse, the only team to get 5 wins in 2025 was Rice. And then Purdue,
Yep.
Boston College, and Syracuse were all under 4 wins, unfortunately. But because of all the things that we just talked about, there's reasons for optimism for a handful of these teams. Wisconsin's portal pickups, Michigan State gets Pat Fitzgerald, North Carolina got Bobby Petrino, Stanford got Tavita Pritchard, Syracuse gets Steve Angeli back. So the bright side is when people talk about it's a cupcake schedule, they take what those teams did last year and just assume they're going to replicate it. Now, a team like Boston College, one that we'll talk about in Q4, they might repeat what they did last year. We don't know the answer to that question, but there are some teams that are trending up, and I think that makes this conversation really interesting.
And that's why I like the portal, Trevor, in a lot of ways. That's why I like the portal, because it does give you a chance to go out and have a good offseason and all of a sudden turn things around quickly. What I don't love about the portal is the fact that teams have to redo it every year, because then they end up losing a bunch of guys as well. It'd just be nice. That's why we are supporters of the one-time transfer portal thing. And then after that, you got to sit out a year, because there's just this constant remaking of the roster. But you talk about portal pickups, though, Trev. One aspect of it is there's going to be multiple former Notre Dame players on the schedule this year because of the portal. Obviously, you look at Rice, Preston Zinner transferred to Rice, and then obviously KK Smith transferred to Michigan State. So early in the season, we're actually going to get a chance to see some former Notre Dame players get their opportunity to go somewhere and play. And I think that's kind of a fun thing as well, in my opinion, to see a couple of those guys. And then Bodie Cahoon transferred to Boston College. So there's 3 former Notre Dame players that have transferred to other schools this year. And then, of course, Syracuse has Steve Angeli. And then there's some former Notre Dame players on the schedule this year. Maurice Crum Jr. is the defensive coordinator and linebackers coach at SMU. So there's a connection with some of the stuff in the portal and with the coaching staff too, which I'm a big fan of. So, and I think I love Preston Zinner going to Rice. I thought that was a great move for him. I still wish he would have got a shot to play defense in Notre Dame, but I understand why. Play tight end in Notre Dame. I understand why. They're just so loaded. He came at Notre Dame at the worst possible time. It wasn't that long ago Preston Zinner would have played a lot more football for Notre Dame. A lot more football on either side of the ball.
I was just about to say either offense or defense.
Pick a side, and he's going to help you out. But and there's been some really good football teams that Preston Zinner would have played a lot of football on. We were talking about how best teams in Notre Dame in 2015. I think he plays on the 2015 team. I think he plays on the 2021 team. I think he plays on that team, is in the rotation. There's several years, 2019, I think he's in the rotation at tight end, or not 2019, excuse me, 2017, I think he's in the rotation at tight end. When you look at, obviously they had Cole Kmet was a freshman that year, and a veteran version of Preston Zinner. KK Smith is another guy that if he'd have come to Notre Dame and maybe at a different time, maybe he's playing more. But I like those pickups. I think those guys all have an opportunity to go somewhere and play. I think that the biggest we'll see that I think could surprise some people is Bodie Cahoon. That's a big one for me.
Yeah, I'll be very interested to see what he does on Boston College's defense. He, especially with some of their portal losses and losses to graduation, he automatically comes in and becomes one of the most athletic guys that they have on their roster on defense. He was one of the most athletic guys in the linebacker room at Notre Dame. It's just tough to crack a rotation when we're talking about Drake Bowen, Kingston, Madden, Jalen Sneed, Jaden Osbury. It's just tough, unfortunately. But I'm with you. I'm interested to see what he does, what Preston Zinner does. And I'm hoping that Michigan State uses KK Smith the right way, because he can be a weapon for that offense. But now it's just about if he can get a little bit stronger on the field, and then if Michigan State uses him properly.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. But I think that's what's going to make this season fun, Trev, is there's a lot of unknowns for not just Notre Dame a little bit, but a lot of their opponents. And those unknowns are going to go a long way towards determining how good this schedule is. I think when you look at the schedule, and you guys will see that when we go through it, but there's the 4 good teams and then a lot of not good, as Trevor pointed it out. I think it's going to be 3 layers. I think there's going to be the really good teams at the top. and how do they stay good, then there's going to be some decent teams in the middle, some 6 to 8 win teams. And then there's going to be some teams that are really bad on the schedule, obviously. And that's just kind of where we're at. So I'm looking forward to it.
Brian, let's dive into Q1 here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. And when we start talking about Q1, this is an interesting start to the season for Notre Dame. It is basically a polar opposite from what they did last year, starting it out against 2 playoff teams. And, they started out on a Sunday at Lambeau Field against Wisconsin. And then they got a short week. They're at home the next week against Rice at home. And then they have a night game against Michigan State at home as well. So we're talking about a Q1 that has 2 night games in it. Now, Q1 last year did, but the outlook of the opponents is a little bit different. And Q1's going to be interesting this year.
Night games against Miami and Texas A&M are a little bit different than night games against Rice and Wisconsin and Michigan State. But I'm glad that Michigan State game is at night. I know I'm in the minority here, but I feel like Notre Dame needs a reset of the last time they played in Notre Dame Stadium, which was 2016. That's the last time Michigan State has been in Notre Dame Stadium, which is crazy to think that's been a decade since they've been played in Notre Dame Stadium. Because the last time they played, period, was 2017, and that was in East Lansing. But if you remember that day, Notre Dame lost that game and got beat convincingly. Like, they came back late to make it an 8-point game, but Michigan State dominated that football game. And Michigan State was worse than Notre Dame was that year. They were 3-9.
Yeah.
And so definitely a little bit of a rematch. And you see here, you look at the projected win odds, the win numbers for not odds, but the betting numbers for what are they called?
The over-under win totals.
The over-under win totals. You have Wisconsin at 6.5, Rice, they only do Power 4, and then Michigan State at 3.5. So I think when you start off first and foremost, Trev, FanDuel is agreeing with us in that we expect Wisconsin to be improved this season. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Number one is I think they were a little better than their record last year. Wisconsin wasn't a great football team last year. They went 4-8, but Wisconsin also played one of the toughest schedules in college football last season. I mean, they played number 1 Indiana, number 4 Oregon, number 5 Ohio State, number 9 Alabama, number 17 Iowa, number 21 Michigan last year. Plus, they had to play Washington, who they beat, Illinois, who they beat, and Minnesota on the road. So their schedule last year was pretty rough. There was only one game they lost where you look back and you're like, dude, how did you lose that game? And that was home to Maryland. Other than that, the rest of those games kind of were what you'd think they were going to be. Like they were not going to go out there last year, Trev, and beat Ohio State at home. You know what I mean? They were going to have a tough time with Iowa at home. I think they're not going to beat Michigan at Michigan, Alabama at Alabama, Oregon at Oregon, or Indiana at Indiana. Like those were guaranteed like 6 losses. The Maryland game is the one that was the problem. And then early in the year, I think through the middle of the season, I think it was the fact that they were not only losing, but they were getting blown out. That was a bit of a problem. You lose by 24 to Bama, 17 to Maryland, 14 to Michigan. And then in back-to-back games against Iowa and Ohio State, they got beat by combined 71-0. After that, they were a much different team, and finished the season off on a much stronger note. Even the Indiana loss, which ended 31-7, I think, wasn't it like 10-7 at halftime? Yeah, it was 10-7 at halftime. And it was a much more that was the most arguably the most competitive first half that Indiana played in the regular season last year. Then, of course, they beat Washington. They beat Illinois by 17, and then played a very competitive game against Minnesota where they lost by 10. But it was a hard-fought game. Combine that with the fact that you and I both think that Wisconsin had a very good offseason from a portal standpoint, and you start to understand why there's a lot more optimism that Wisconsin's going to be an improved football team this year. And I think that's the biggest storyline for me coming out of this, is that opening game opponent could potentially provide a tougher test than we think.
Yeah, without a doubt. Wisconsin's been a team that we've been higher on than most throughout the season. And higher on doesn't mean they're going to be competing for the Big Ten championship, but their schedule sets up more favorably. There's no Ohio State. There's no Indiana. There's no Michigan. There's no Oregon. So they're putting themselves in a position. Now, the biggest question for Wisconsin is, how are you going to be able to bounce back from a presumed loss to Notre Dame? If that game for Wisconsin, now I think it will using air quotes here, get out of hand to what the naked eye is of people just being able to tune in and watch the game, I think Notre Dame is going to win that game handily. If Wisconsin can put that in the rearview mirror, bounce back this year against Western Illinois, they have an opportunity to go out to Penn State and Happy Valley and get an upset in a game where I'm sure Penn State's going to be favored. But I'm very interested to see what Wisconsin can do this year. Very interested.
Yeah, because if you look at their tough teams last year, Trevor, they always followed it up with somebody also tough.
Yep.
With the exception of, playing Maryland after Alabama State, but playing Maryland a week after Alabama State, Malik Washington is a different animal than having to play Western Illinois and Eastern Michigan after playing Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And then after they played Michigan, they had Iowa. After they played Iowa, they had Ohio State. After they played Ohio State, they had Oregon. After they played Oregon, they had Washington. After they played Washington, they had Indiana. After they played Indiana, they had Illinois. Like, it was just that gauntlet where this year it is a little bit more manageable because after Notre Dame, to your point, you do have Western Illinois and you have Eastern Michigan. Then you have a tough road game at Penn State. Then you're home against Michigan State. And then you have a bye. You're at UCLA. You get USC at home, at Iowa, Rutgers at home, at Maryland, at Purdue, home against Minnesota. So if they are improved, then you understand why that over-under was set at 6.5. Because, as I said, I do think this is going to be an improved Wisconsin team. And at the end of the day, it's all going to come down to the quarterback. And I think that's an intriguing storyline of the first quarter is Notre Dame is playing much more mobile quarterbacks in quarter one than maybe you would think based on what those teams were last year. Now, obviously, Rice was a team who had a mobile quarterback last year. That's not a surprise, but Wisconsin did not. They did not have a mobile quarterback last year. Chase Jenkins obviously was a pretty good runner for Rice last year. He transferred obviously this offseason, but then they replaced him with Ja'Cory Brown, who's a former 4-star recruit from Miami. Who the problem he had with Miami is he couldn't throw well enough to run that offense, but he could definitely run. And so you're going to get your defense is going to get tested in quarter one right away. We're going to find out right away if Notre Dame has a game plan to handle mobile quarterbacks.
100%. We're not going to have to wait long for that. You mentioned Ja'Cory Brown at Rice. Last year, he was at UCF. I watched him play in a couple of games. Definitely utilized his legs a whole lot. Rice, to your point, on FanDuel, they don't have an over-under win total out yet. They don't have any out for the G5, but I'll be very interested to see what Rice does this year too. They were one of those teams that got a bowl bid at 5-7 because enough 6-6 or 7-6 teams declined their bowl bid. I guess in Notre Dame's case, a 10-2 team to decline their bowl bid. But Rice is a team that ended last year 5-8 with a very experienced roster. And I know on offense this year, they only have like 2 guys coming back from their starting lineup from this past season. Hopefully guys like Ja'Cory Brown can help revitalize that offense. But they'll be a young team from an experience standpoint. They have some redshirt sophomores, some redshirt juniors, a couple of seniors stepping into the starting lineup on both sides of the ball. But in terms of playing time, talking about like redshirt juniors, kids going into their redshirt junior season that played like 60 snaps last year. Yeah. And then obviously Michigan State will be very, very interesting to see what they do. They're over under win total from a betting standpoint. They're over under win total under Pat Fitzgerald being 3.5 is.
I was a little surprised by that. And apparently, Trevor, it's Ja'Cory Brown, even though it's spelled Ja'Cory. It's Ja'Cory Brown because people just make up spellings for their kids' names nowadays. But it's Ja'Cory Brown, even though on no planet is that how it should be pronounced, but whatever. But, Michigan State's another one, Trev, that that's the one that surprises me from this quarter. Was the Michigan State one, because I understand they weren't very good last year, and they don't have a mobile quarterback. That's a little bit of a different animal. But I kind of like what Michigan State did this offseason in the portal. I mean, I understand that you can only project so much, but I mean, Michigan State to me is a team, when you look at 3.5, they played Toledo, they played Eastern Michigan. They get Nebraska at home, Illinois at home, Northwestern at home, Rutgers on the road, UCLA on the road. Like 3.5 is a pretty low number. Like they pretty much just think there's a chance they go 1-9 against the Power 4 teams on their schedule, which I think is I don't think they're going to be that bad. I don't. I could be wrong, but I don't. I mean, I know they were bad, but as bad as they were last year, they still won 4 games. So including a 10-point win over over Michigan State at the end of the year. So, and they beat a pretty solid Western Michigan team under Lance Taylor last year too. So that was the one of the, when you look at the first quarter, that's the one that surprised me a little bit, was Michigan State being low. But just overall, Trevor, when I think of quarter one, I think there's some tests that are going to be good for Notre Dame. I think that we're gonna learn a little something about Chris Ash in the first quarter. You know, does he resort to against mobile quarterbacks? Does he resort into a sit back, read and react, keep everything in front of you mindset, or does he attack it and not let that quarterback get like a vertical head of steam going? Not let those quarterbacks get comfortable in the pocket. I think by playing two quarterbacks that are mobile, especially Jakari Brown, who's not a very good passer. You know, you had mentioned his success at UCF, Trev. In 2024, he had over 400 yards rushing and averaged over 7.5 yards a carry on like 50-some carries. But, I mean, he can hurt you with the run. That offense is the way that offense is designed. They've got good running backs. Like, do they sit back and read and react and try to play an NFL-style defense, or do they say, hey, we're going to attack this and turn our athletes loose? I do think we're going to learn a little bit about this team. And then I'll tell you this right now, Trev, I would argue that the most talented group of skill players that Notre Dame is going to play in quarter one, maybe in quarter 1 and 2 combined, is Michigan State, because of what they did in the portal. I think that's a team, like I keep saying, like Cam Edwards, 1,200-yard rusher last year at UConn. You look at KK Smith coming from Notre Dame, Frederick Moore coming in from Michigan, you know, who's a kid that's got some ability. Obviously, I'm not going to try to pronounce the quarterback's name. I'm sorry, y'all. It's just I'd butcher it, so I'm not even going to do that. You know, it's like their skill talent is actually pretty good. I think the question for Michigan State is, and they also got a running back from Iowa who's been a part of the rotation for really 3 years in a row now. Can they be good enough in the trenches? Because they lost a lot in the portal, especially on defense in the trenches. But I actually like Michigan State skill talent. So you're going to have some decent individual tests. I don't know that any of those teams as a whole are going to give Notre Dame a real tough time. But when I look at this, I do think there's some aspects that could challenge Notre Dame, especially defensively. I think the defense is going to get tested more early in the season than the offense will, because I think that the Colton Joseph at Wisconsin is going to present a test. Just by himself presents a test. They've got some young receivers coming back. You know, they've got a portal kid that they got last year. We talked about the Abu Sama kid. Darian Dupree's an Illinois running back that Notre Dame offered. They got Brian Jackson transferred in from USC. You know, he ran all over Notre Dame late in that game in 2024. Now, part of that was they were kind of letting them throw a little bit. But the point is, Trevor, is they've got some talent too. That's going to be a different test for Notre Dame than you'd think, looking at what we saw from Wisconsin last year. I think that makes this whole thing real challenging. Defensively, I think they're going to face some tests. Other side of the ball, I'm not so sure. But I do think we're going to learn a little something about Notre Dame's defense early in the season, especially in the front seven, and more so with how Chris Ash is going to utilize the defense.
Yeah, I agree, man. We were talking before the show about how I think each quarter kind of has an overarching theme to it for Notre Dame's season. And I'm a big believer in kind of knocking down pillars of, you know, stacking a successful regular season for Notre Dame. And this quarter, it's very simple. This one sets the tone right off the bat. You get 2 night games. You get a rivalry renewed with Michigan State. You have the Shamrock Series, game 1 against Wisconsin, against underrated skill talent at both places, at Wisconsin and Michigan State. This will be the one where all offseason we talked about, you know, what are they going to look like in week 1? And are they going to come out truly fired up? Or are they going to be able to be focused for a team in a season opener game where they should beat handily? And what does all of that look like for Notre Dame? So this quarter will absolutely set the tone. And I love the point that you brought up. They will be tested along the way. People will just be very quick to look at the logos and look at Wisconsin and remember what they've done the last couple of seasons, or lack thereof. Same thing with Michigan State, and say, yeah, it's a cupcake. It's easy. I'm not sitting here saying if Notre Dame isn't focused and plays their A+ game, they could lose. That's not what I'm saying. but there are individual tests. Wisconsin, in a lot of ways, how I believe their offense is going to be set up or should be set up, mirrors BYU in a lot of ways, especially with a mobile quarterback, big bruiser types of running backs that are going to be productive on the ground. Very interested to see how this turns out, man. But I'm with you. Their Q1 will present some challenges, and it'll be up to Notre Dame to be able to knock some of those out.
Now, what I don't know, Trev, is how will they be on defense? That is a little bit more of a question mark, because
you're talking like the teams on defense,
the opposing defenses. Like, how will the Notre Dame offense be tested? Because when I look at this, Wisconsin last year actually had a pretty good scoring defense. They ranked 39th last year in scoring defense. They were 15th in rush defense, 62nd in pass defense, 18th in rushing yards per play. So, like, their defense was scrappy last year, which you'd kind of expect from a Luke Fickell-led team. But that's also a defense that is losing all but one of their secondary players, is being replaced by a transfer. And how many times we talked about a DB that transferred to this school from Wisconsin that we like? There's the linebacker that transferred to Ohio State from Wisconsin that we like. They lost some pretty good players in the portal, and a lot of the guys that were factors in why they were successful. That'll be something to watch. But honestly, the issue for Luke Fickell since he arrived at Wisconsin has not necessarily been defense. It's been offense. He hasn't been able to do a whole lot on offense. I mean, you look at his tenure in when did he take over? He took over in 23,
I believe.
They gave up 20.2 points per game that season. Most points they gave up in a game in the regular season was 31 to Washington State. They held Iowa to 15. They held Ohio State to 24. They held Indiana to 20. Of course, that was a different Indiana team. Held Nebraska to 17. They were pretty decent. And see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of their opponents in the regular season were held to 17 points or less. And then in 24, they gave up 23.1 points per game. And part of that was, Bama and USC in back-to-back games put a lot on them, gave up a lot to Nebraska, gave up a lot to Iowa. But then, they had some other games they played better on defense, Trev. Oregon, they held to 16, and Minnesota. So that was their one down year. And then last year, as bad as they were a 4-8 team, Trev, that only gave up 21.6 points per game. And, and all didn't give up 40 points once, despite playing the number 1, 4, 5, 9, 17, and 21 team in the country. They never gave up 40 points. Ironically, the two teams that scored the most on them were Alabama and Iowa, which not Ohio State, not Oregon, not Indiana. It was Alabama and Iowa, who didn't have very good offenses last year. So it is pretty interesting. But I just found that interesting. But you look at Rice on defense last year, Trev, they ranked 124th in scoring defense, 88th in rush defense, 106th in pass defense. Michigan State ranked 104th in scoring defense, 65th in rush defense, 93rd in pass defense, and then lost their 3 best defensive linemen, all transferred out. 2 of them, one went to Arizona State, Jalen Thompson. Their D tackle went to USC. They lost a lot from their defense. But I do think there's some things to like about their defense as well, Trevor, and some of the guys they've got coming back. So I think that's the interesting thing is I think we're going to see the defense the Notre Dame defense get tested more early in the season than what we're going to see from the Notre Dame offense, which I think will be pretty interesting, especially the offensive line. That's where I think Notre Dame should have a pretty substantial advantage in the first several games of the season.
Yeah, you and I see that very much the same. A lot of the tests for Notre Dame early on will be like individual tests. Like can Notre Dame stack consistency? It's almost like that faceless opponent argument, whereas I'm with you completely. The defense will face some unique challenges. Mm-hmm. Colton Joseph at Wisconsin. I'm with you. I'm not going to try to pronounce Michigan State's quarterback's name. It's like Alicio. Couldn't even try the last name. And I'm with you there. But
like I struggle like Ukrainian, Czechoslovakian, like I just Polish names. Like I'm not great at it. So I don't even want to try to butcher it.
No, I get you. Defense will absolutely. So it kind of brings us around to this. When you look at these Q1 opponents, Brian, you look at Wisconsin, Rice, and Michigan State. Who would you say is their toughest opponent? I think it's clearly between 2. I'm not willing to put Rice in that conversation, but between Wisconsin and Michigan State, Do you have enough information available to you to kind of deem a more difficult opponent?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one, Trev, because there's the team that I think is going to be the toughest opponent based on what we know now, and the team that I think when we look back is going to be the toughest opponent. And right now, of what we know, I think Wisconsin is going to be the toughest opponent. I look at Colton Joseph and his dynamic run throw ability. Didn't he rush for 1,000 yards last year? I believe he did.
1,007.
Yeah, including the only player to rush for 100 yards, I believe, against Indiana last year.
Yep.
Matter of fact, I believe I'm correct here, Trevor, but Colton Joseph had more rushing yards against Indiana than any other team had rushing against Indiana. He ran for 179. I think the next most they gave up was like 117 to Miami, and that was on like one carry. Most of that was on one carry from Mark Fletcher, who went for 70 yards. So, that's going to be an interesting piece of it. But I think the combination of him and just kind of looking at some of the other aspects of that depth chart, I think that Wisconsin is the biggest. Okay, we know who they are more so than we know what Michigan State is, and especially at quarterback, because I think with Michigan State, yes, we saw their quarterback play a little bit last year, but it's, as we've said a million times, man, being the guy that comes off the bench to replace a starter that's struggling is a whole lot different than going into a season where you are the guy from start to finish. The offseason's built around you. You had two pretty good games to end the season, Trev. I mean, last two games of the year, they had a 3-point loss at Iowa and a 10-point win at home over Maryland in his starts. And they, actually, let's look at his last four starts. He didn't play great against Penn State in an 18-point loss, but they lost by 3 points at Minnesota. He went 20 of 28 for 311 yards, one touchdown, no picks. They lost by 3 at Iowa. He went 25 of 42 for 255 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. And then in a 10-point win to end the season over Maryland, he went 27 of 39 for 292 yards, 4 touchdowns, and a pick. Like, that gives us some thoughts like, hey, maybe they're going to be pretty good at quarterback this year. But we've seen in the past plenty of times where a guy comes off the bench with no pressure, season's over, we're not going to a bowl game, nothing to see here, and you go out there and shine. But then the next year, you're now the guy, all the pressure's on you, and are you able to step up and perform to that level? That's a very interesting thing to decide. So they're my sleeper team on this schedule. They're the biggest sleeper team I have on this entire schedule, Trevor's Michigan State. Because I would not be shocked. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. I won't be shocked if we look back at this season and they're one of the two best non-quote-unquote Big Four opponents that Notre Dame plays. And when we refer to Big Four just moving forward, we're talking about Miami, SMU, BYU, and Navy. That's the top 4 teams, clear top 4 teams on Notre Dame's schedule. But it would not shock me, Trevor, if at the end of the year, 2 of the teams from this quarter are the next 2 best teams that they play, Michigan State and Wisconsin. Wisconsin, I think, is closer to being there. That's why I think they're the toughest team here. But I also think Michigan State is a team that people need to keep an eye on, because I think this team could end up being a lot better than some people think it's going to be this season. And they kept Joe Rossi on as defensive coordinator, and I'm a big Joe Rossi fan. I think he's going to fit in real nicely with what Pat Fitzgerald's trying to do. And they hired, in my opinion, one of the best special teams coordinators. Obviously, Biaggi's done some good things. My buddy Justin Lustig at Penn State, I believe, won the Broyles Award or was the special teams coach of the year last year. But I've said for a long time, next time Notre Dame needs a special teams coach, if they don't want to hire Justin Lustig, who I'm biased towards, he's my friend, LeVar Woods would be a home run hire as a special teams coach. He did a great job at Iowa over those years. One thing that's not getting talked enough about is I think that Pat Fitzgerald hit an absolute home run putting this coaching staff together. What I'm curious about in a lot of ways, the question that I have, however, is on the offensive side of the ball. He hired John McNulty as his quarterback's coach. John McNulty's a good football coach. He hired Nick Sheridan as the offensive coordinator. He's been with Kalen DeBoer forever. He was with him at Indiana, Fresno State, obviously in Alabama. Will they be able to bring that Kalen DeBoer style of offense to Michigan State? That's an interesting question. But I think there's an opportunity that Michigan State could be one of the big surprise teams in the schedule this year. They did not go 4-8 last year because they had a 4-8 roster. They had a 4-8 culture. Let me rephrase. They had a 2-10 culture. And then their talent was able to help them win some games. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. There's a world that both Wisconsin and Michigan State both end up 7-5 and have really big wins along the way to kind of vault them at one. For Wisconsin, it's Luke Fickell kind of keeps his head above water a little bit. And for Michigan State, it's almost a revitalization of that program that's been lukewarm for so long outside of 2021. But now I'm with you. Cool thing about it is we'll get to watch them square off. They play each other this year at Wisconsin, and so very interested to see that matchup. But there's a world that they both go 7-5. They're a lot better than what we think that they could be. And we look back in December and talk about, man, Notre Dame picked up some good wins in Q1.
Yeah, I want to just say this before we move on to quarter two, but I do think it's awesome that we're going to get to watch that first Notre Dame game at Lambeau Field. We haven't talked a lot about it, but that's going to be pretty cool. And I'm very curious to see when Notre Dame's going to have their uniform released for that game. They're going to wear something different. When are they going to release it? I can't wait to see that. Like, I have a feeling it's going to be sort of Packer-esque. I think it's going to be, this is 100% my opinion, like gold helmet with that darker green that they had. And the jersey will be that darker green that they released last week for the logo for the game. I think it'll be like that. And then like a gold pant that kind of looks like, the Packer, the layout of the Packer uniforms. It wouldn't shock me if they do something like that, but I'm very curious to see the uniforms. But I think it's excellent to be able to look at this and be like, man, arguably the most iconic football team in college football gets to play in arguably the most iconic stadium remaining in college football or in the NFL. I think that's pretty cool. Very, very cool.
Brian, let's talk about Q2 of Notre Dame season here in the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. And this is one where, I said before, I think that each quarter kind of has its themes. And I think the theme for this one is going to be, what's the level of focus for this program? You have your first true road games. You play at Lambeau Field, but it's like kind of that neutral site feel. It's the Shamrock Series. You have your first true road games in this. You have 2 of your rivalry games in this. Back-to-back road games in this quarter. Very interested to see how this one goes.
Yeah, this is a quarter that, Trevor, I don't know that I'm as optimistic about some teams ascending. Like that this is a quarter where I think the biggest thing for me is going to be, this is the quarter that we learn about Notre Dame's leadership. Because this is the quarter where you don't have the Lambeau Field game. You don't have the home opener to get excited about. You don't have the night game against Sparty to get excited about. You have 3 teams that I just think simply are not very good. And will Notre Dame kind of sleepwalk through this schedule? Or will they be locked in and focused about, like playing to the Notre Dame standard? Because the reality is this, Trevor, is they could sleepwalk through this part of the schedule and earn 3 convincing wins, and it ends up being a negative because they developed some bad habits that resulted in them just out-towning people that put you in a tough spot when you then go into quarter 3, which is without a doubt your toughest quarter. So I think this is where the maturity and the leadership of this football team is going to be tested, because there is no spinning. This is the weakest quarter on the schedule, and it's not even close. I mean, you look at the FanDuel numbers right there. FanDuel has Michigan State as low as these teams, but FanDuel still has Wisconsin at 6.5. I mean, that's the most of any of the teams outside the top 4 that you're going to see. There's, even if you think some of these teams are going to be better, it's like, okay, 5-7 better, 6-6 better. Like, there's nobody on the schedule except maybe Carolina, which we'll talk about, that I look back and say, hey, I think that team could end up being a lot better than people think. In certain areas, I think they're going to be better, but I think these teams are outside of Rice are kind of carrying the bottom of the schedule when I talk about ranking my opponents. And I don't know that I have the same optimism that this part of the schedule is going to get better than the other will. And we're going to find out. But, there's a chance Purdue comes into this game 1-2. It's not a given they're going to beat Wake Forest at home and win at UCLA. Call me crazy, but I'm not super optimistic that they're going to definitely be 1-2 coming into this matchup. So when I look at it, it's like, yeah, this could be the one where maybe they get caught sleeping. North Carolina, before they played Notre Dame, plays TCU in Ireland and at Clemson. There's a chance and then they have a bye. There's a chance they come in to this part of the schedule with a losing record. And you look at Stanford and their schedule, they actually have I don't want to say, they might even have the toughest schedule of the group. They got to play Hawaii at home, a team that beat them last year. Then they got to play Miami at home. Then they got to play at Duke. Then they get Georgia Tech at home. Then the week before they play Notre Dame, they play at Wake Forest. That's 5 bowl teams. Excuse me, 4 bowl teams and a playoff team that they have to play. So I worry about this part of the schedule being the one where Notre Dame, if they don't have good leadership and they don't have good focus and maturity as a football team, this could be where, yes, they win and win comfortably, but it masks some bad habits that they're forming because they're playing teams that just simply aren't good.
I would feel a lot better about Notre Dame's schedule if Q1 and Q2 were reversed. You get that, underrated Wisconsin team, the underrated Michigan State team, because there are things that we can point to with those programs that's like, hey, they might be on the ascension. I have to dig pretty deep with some of these programs, especially like with Purdue, them putting up 30 points in South Bend last year. I got to imagine Marcus Freeman and that defense remembers that. I would be remiss to say that they are going to Notre Dame against Purdue is going to think more about the 25 game than they will the 24 game the last time they played at Ross-Ade Stadium. When I look at North Carolina, they have the addition of Bobby Petrino. He's walking into an offense that returns 2 players from last year, running back Demon June and wide receiver Jordan Shipp.
And by the way, Notre Dame actually annihilated Bobby Petrino's team when he was an offensive coordinator for a team last year that had way more talent than the one he's walking into in North Carolina. You know what I mean? Like
100%, especially a North Carolina team that it sounds like they're going to be relying on Billy Edwards to be the quarterback of that offense. And we just got done talking about how bad Wisconsin's quarterback situation has been the last couple of years. Billy Edwards was at Wisconsin. Then Stanford is a team that I am interested to see what they're going to be next year. Year 2 under Tavita Pritchard, year 3 going into the Andrew Luck tenure as general manager. But again, this quarter can kind of be summed up by one thing, in my opinion, and it's outside of, and you could, depending on what angle you want to talk about it, even include Ryan Brown in this. It's a very underwhelming quarter for quarterback play. You got Davis Warren at Stanford. You have Billy Edwards at North Carolina. Ryan Brown is a talented kid, but then it's just his ability to overall put it together in year 2. We'll see.
Yeah, I was a little disappointed from the season we got from Ryan Brown last year. I mean, and he started well, Trev. I mean, he started real well, and the wheels just fell off. He passed for 311 yards against Ball State. He went for 305 against USC. He did get picked off 3 times. Passed for 250 against Notre Dame, made some plays in that game. Passed for 302 yards against Illinois. After that, he passed for 203, 31. I think he got hurt that game against Northwestern. 117, 133, 76. He went 1 of 6 for 17 yards and a pick against Washington and got benched. And then did okay against Indiana numbers-wise, but threw for 238 yards. We did it on 47 attempts. He threw 7 touchdowns in the first 5 games. In the next 7 games, he threw 2 touchdowns and got picked off 5 times. I was very disappointed with how he performed, especially when you look at how well he played. And this goes back to what we talked about earlier with the kid from Michigan State. I mean, in the one start he made in 2024, he looked great. And he looked good early last year, but then just the wheels fell off a little bit, and he couldn't replicate that with any consistency. Yeah, Davis Warren is expected to be starting quarterback at Stanford. That's a bad sign. And what's disappointing for Stanford is, Trev, in a lot of ways, there's things I really like about this Stanford football team. Like their offensive line should be okay. They got some guys coming back. They've got a lot of guys coming back on defense that are good. Matt Rose comes back. Ernest Cooper comes back in the secondary. Like there's some solid players there. They get John Anthony Hall, who's a kid that Notre Dame recruited out of high school a little bit. He's going to have a chance to step in and help them this year. They got a kid that transferred in from Yale this offseason. So they got a freshman receiver that was committed to Michigan that I like a lot, big tall kid named Zion Robinson that I think has a shot to play for them this year. And then, of course, the running back room. We love Micah Ford. We've talked about him for now 2 years in a row, and then Cedric Urban finishes his career there. So there's some things to like, but then you get to quarterback, and you're like, that's a hot mess. Like, that is an absolute hot mess. Davis Warren is not a good quarterback. No. And, I mean, they may be missing Ben Gulbranson this year. That's how bad it is. At least how it was 2 years ago, and he was a starter at Michigan.
Yeah.
So I think that's what a lot of this comes down to. This is college football, man. Quarterback can have a big impact. Part of the reason that there's some optimism with the quarter one is some of those teams have pretty good quarterbacks coming in or coming back. That's not the same case at North Carolina. So we'll see, man. But like when I look at that, that's a big problem I have. I'll say this: there are a couple individual players that I'm interested to see how they perform at their new places. Obviously, Jarrett Gibson transfers from Texas to Purdue, and then they got Fame Edjaboy from Minnesota, who's was a pretty solid rotation back last year. They should have some decent running backs there. I look at North Carolina; they have one of the better receivers that's coming back on the schedule that doesn't play for Miami. Like, our all-opponent team might just be like the Miami starting receiving core. Like I say somewhat jokingly. But Jordan Shipp's a good football player. He had over 60 catches and 600 yards last year for North Carolina. So there's some interesting players coming back. Jelani Thurman transferred to tight end. He's from Ohio State. He transferred into tight end. He's been in a rotation kid. He's played for Ohio State a little bit the last couple of years, but mainly as a blocking tight end. But there's some interesting players. Jordan Washington transferred in from Texas. There's some intriguing portal players in these two classes, Trev, but just not enough to where I can look at any of these teams and feel like, hey, that team's really going to get it turned around because of that portal class they brought in. I just don't see that. And that's why I don't see a lot of optimism for these teams, because they also won't have the quarterbacks around them. I think the one potential sleeper team in this breakdown, Trev, for me, as I look at it, is potentially Purdue, because there are some athletes there. And if Ryan Brown can consistently be the better version of himself, I think that changes things for Purdue a little bit. I do. And then how are they in year two of the Barry Odom era is another one. But like, Notre Dame went after Xavier Townsend a little bit, a portal kid from Iowa State and UCF, and they got him. They got a kid, I'm going to try my best to pronounce, Assad Wasim from Florida Atlantic. He had 66 catches for 699 yards last year at Florida Atlantic. He's a quality football player. So I look at it and I see some things there, Trev, that you're like, you know what, that's actually not bad. But then you pop in the film of last year's team and you're like, yeah, that's a problem. They got Jaden Mangum in the portal, who I believe transferred in from Michigan State. Was a good player at Michigan State the last 2 years, had over 80 tackles the last 2 years. So Purdue is the one team that could potentially maybe be a little bit better than people think, if it all comes down to this. If Ryan Brown steps up, that's for them specifically. That's going to be the big key.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm keeping my eye on Purdue. That team for me in this quarter is Stanford, and I know having Davis Warren as your quarterback is just it's a big mark, unfortunately. But when I go and I look at the rest of this roster, I think Stanford has the roster, unlike some of the other teams in this quarter, that they could potentially have success in spite of their quarterback play.
Yeah,
that's one thing that I could see. They returned 4 of their 5 starting offensive linemen from last year. Micah Ford comes back defensively. They have impact players coming back at every level. They have Ernest Cooper and Tavara Tafiti coming back at edge. Matt Rose,
who I
mentioned,
like,
comes
by the
back.
way. Yeah, I'll talk about that in a second, but yeah, keep going.
Yeah, I mean, their secondary, they bring back Brandon Nicholson, Jay Wright, Scotty Edwards, and then I like some of their portal additions. Nico Brown coming over from Yale that you mentioned. They got Leroy Bryant from Washington. He's a corner that's coming in. And then Tavita Pritchard, somebody who has experience playing at Stanford, understand what that's about. These players are going into a season where they don't have an interim head coach, so they know that there could be a higher level of buy-in there. But the biggest thing overarching, Brian, that concerns me about this quarter the most, looking at it from a Notre Dame lens, I'm going to learn a lot about Chris Ash in this quarter. I'm going to learn a ton because of the level of quarterbacks that I'm expecting them to face. they could play a very vanilla defense and hold Purdue, North Carolina, and Stanford to under 20 points. They could. And I am going to learn a lot about him as they are gearing up for Q3, something that we're going to talk about here in a little bit, which is their hardest quarter of the season. So I think we're going to learn a lot about Chris Ash in this quarter as well.
Interesting. So give me a little bit more into what you want to learn, what you think we'll learn about him this quarter, good or bad. Like I'd love to flesh that out because I think that's a very interesting point that you're making.
I think we're going to learn a lot about Chris Ash philosophically against Purdue, North Carolina, and Stanford. I think that there's a world where he could play that soft zone, passive zone, not unleashing the defensive line. And just because of the disparaging talent gap between these three teams and where Notre Dame is at, they could have successful days to the naked eye on defense. But then there are going to be some things that we dive into in upon further review and things like that. It's like, hey, this just won't work against BYU, Miami, SMU. And this is you're halfway through the season at this point. Once this quarter is done, you're halfway through the season. And when I look at a team like Ohio State last year, who they were preaching from, week one to when they got into the playoffs, like, oh, we'll just turn it on in the postseason. It's like, I'm not a big believer in that. You can just turn it on and turn it off depending on the level of opponent that you play. I don't buy into that philosophy. So that's kind of what I mean about we're going to learn a lot about Chris Ash. Is he going to attack Purdue? Is he going to attack North Carolina? Is he going to attack Stanford? Or is he just going to kind of sit back and be like, hey, look, Davis Warren is not going to do anything against his defense no matter what we call. So we'll just kind of roll the balls out there and then just kind of
try to show everyone how smart I am, run a million sim
Yes.
pressures, do a bunch of stuff to make me look smart, but doesn't actually impact it. Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. What I find fascinating, Trev, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, I think this is the quarter that we learn the most about the Notre Dame offensive line from a pass pro standpoint. I think there are some sneaky good tests, even though I don't think the teams are very good. This is a quarter where you're gonna have some interesting situations from a pass rushing standpoint. And one of the teams that I look at is Stanford. North Carolina. They got a kid that transferred last year from Delaware, played for Carolina last year. His name is Makart Abu Jayoud is my best shot at pronouncing that. He had in the Power 4 level last year for the Tar Heels last year. He had 42 total pressures, according to Pro Football Focus, and he had 19 hits plus sacks in the quarterback. Now, he didn't do this by padding up his stats against Charlotte and Richmond. He did have very good stats against them, but he had 6 pressures, including 5 hits on the quarterback against Virginia, 5 against Stanford, Syracuse, 6 against Stanford, 5 against Duke, 4 against NC State. This is a kid last year that went from Delaware to the Power 4 level and had 10.5 sacks and 12.5 tackles for loss. And almost all of them came when the second half of the year as he got acclimated to playing at this level. He had 8.5 of his 10.5 sacks came in the last 6 games last year. And I thought that was a very he's an intriguing player on film, Trev. Like when you watch him, like he's like 6'5", 255, 260, pretty good arm length and just consistently productive. And the thing that's crazy is he never produced like that at Delaware. He never, his most pressures he had at Delaware was 23. He had a very high success rate, 23 of his 23 pressures. 12 of them resulted in hits or sacks in the quarterback. So he did pile up a decent number of sack totals, but he was kind of a bit of a one-trick pony there. So I thought that was pretty interesting to kind of see how that part of it is. Like, that's an interesting one. And then another team is one that you talked about already, and that's Stanford. I think Stanford is going to be an improved defensive football team up front this year, especially on the edge. And you talk about Tevaroa Tafiti. He had 37 pressures last year. Ernest Cooper's an ascending player he only had 16 pressures last year, but that's a talented kid, Trev. He's got some ability. Notre Dame was able to kind of keep him in check last year, but I think their ability to get after the quarterback is going to be improved this year compared to where it was last year. And then obviously with Purdue, we'll see what Purdue can do. I don't think that's a team that I'm necessarily quite as concerned with. I don't CJ Madden. He was one of those kids that they got from Georgia that people looked at and were like, hey, you got a Georgia kid. And you're like, yeah, but he wasn't very good at Georgia. You know what I mean? And he couldn't get on the field at Georgia. But they also had another kid that they got last year from Army who didn't play a whole lot for them last year. I'm going to do my best. Some of these kids' names I just really struggle with, so I apologize. It's Elo Madozi, who played at Army the year before, and he had 8 tackles for loss, and he had 6.5 sacks the year before at Army, and was part of that really good Army team. And so he transferred up last year, didn't necessarily play great for them last year, didn't play a ton. Can he be one of those guys that in year 2 of playing at the Power 4 level, can he step up and maybe give them a little bit more? Can he stay healthy? Those type of things. I'm very curious to see how he performs. But Purdue, I'm not quite as set on. Will they be better? But with some of these others, I am very curious to see how they're going to perform this season. I think there's a chance that some of these teams are going to be able to give them a little bit of something. Actually, I think he transferred to Georgia last year, played at Georgia last year, didn't do a whole lot because he shouldn't have transferred to Georgia. I think Purdue's more of his bag. I'm curious to see what he'll do for Purdue this year. He's a kid to keep an eye on for them. But again, 6'4", 6'5", 250, rangy, lengthy. I think this is the quarter prior to the big quarter where we're going to find out how good Will Black and Gerby Lambert are in pass pro. So that part will be very interesting. Now, the pass defenses they play overall in this quarter weren't good. Purdue ranked 110th last year. Stanford ranked 136 in college football last year in pass defense, dead last. Notre Dame had some success throwing the ball against them last year. They didn't exactly light the world on fire. They had a couple big plays, and then they had the long touchdown pass. They didn't play great against Stanford throwing the ball last year, but as we said, they weren't really locked in that game last year. But that is going to be something that I find very fascinating. What's also interesting about this quarter, Trevor, is Purdue's run defense last year was bad. But here's another reason why I think the offensive line could face a test. UNC and Stanford ranked in the top 35 both last year in rush defense. This is the only other quarter besides the 3 you have 2 top 40 rush defenses on your schedule. So combine that with the good edge rushers. This is the quarter where the offensive line starts to show, are they just a good unit or can they take over games? Because if the line dominates this quarter, that's the one part of the Notre Dame team that I will put more into them dominating than other parts. If the Notre Dame defensive line dominates this quarter, good, you should have.
100%.
You should have dominated this quarter. If the offensive line dominates, that's going to give me optimism that they can be good. Not that these teams are going to be as good as Miami or BYU up front. It's just they're good enough that if you dominate, that shows me something. And that's what I'm excited about.
I think that's an excellent point. The fact of the matter is, Brian, through the first 6 games of the season in Q1 and Q2, that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about, the position group matchups, not overall. If they beat Purdue, it tells us something. That comes in Q3 and Q4, but it's all a building process. Or
even if they blow out those teams. We say this before, the big thing in the first 2 quarters, and this is going to be huge for Notre Dame fans, is we as Notre Dame fans and Notre Dame analysts need to not spend as much time focusing on the margins of victory. Excuse me. And so that's something that I want to see from this group is it's not so much, okay, they won by 30, but it's, did this part of the team thrive in this matchup? Did they handle this thing schematically? Did they handle that thing? Did this player perform well in this matchup? Those are the things that I'm very curious about seeing how they perform. Very curious.
With you completely. Don't be so results driven. I can already see it now. We'll be breaking something down in the post-game show and someone will be like, why are we upset? They just won, 45 to 10. It's like, because of we have to pay attention to how it looks like when you play Purdue and North Carolina and Rice and Stanford and all teams who are projected to not be bowl eligible, according to our friends over at FanDuel. That's what we have to look into.
There's only one opponent in the first 6 games that they project as possible bowl eligible, correct? And it's the first one. And they're at 6.5.
Yeah.
They're not exactly like, oh, last year was a fluke, they're going to turn this thing around. It's process over results, Trev. That's really what it comes down to. It's process over results. We as Notre Dame fans in the first 6 games, and the Notre Dame coaches and the Notre Dame players, and this is why I said quarter 2 is going to be very much how we learn about the leadership and culture and character of this football team, because can you truly focus on the gold standard this quarter and not be like, oh, look how many yards I passed for, look how many sacks I had, or look how many catches I had, or yards I had, or tackles I had against teams that just simply aren't that good. It's, did you play to a standard that we set? Because you can beat a team by 40 and still look at the film and say, we're just way better than them. I've coached in games like this, Trev, where it's like you're toying with the other team. You're just so much better than they are. But then you watch the film and you're seeing like lazy blocking. You're seeing guys running half butt routes on the perimeter. You're seeing guys taking bad angles of the football, but it doesn't matter because they're just so much more athletic. They can still chase the running back down. Or if you try that against Miami, you're going to get embarrassed by Malachi Tony or Cooper Barcott. That's the kind of thing we're talking about, Trev, where it's not so much what's the final score, it's process. And we've had these before. I've mentioned this before about how Notre Dame beat Nevada in 2009 and blew them out 30-something to nothing and shut them out. And I said, man, I was not happy about that game. You know, there were guys open for Nevada the whole game, but guys dropped balls. Colin Kaepernick wasn't reading the defense very well. And I'm like, dude, this defense did not play as well as the score dictate. Oh, you're a hater. You think you know everything. You're a know-it-all. And then look what happened the next week. They made Tate Forcier look like a Heisman Trophy winner or candidate. Like you've got to look at what the process is and how they perform to their standard. And here's what you got to ask every time you watch them play in the first 2 quarters. Is that good enough to handle Miami? Is that good enough to beat Texas? Is that good enough to beat Ohio State? Is that good enough to beat Georgia? Is that good enough to beat Oregon? Is that good enough to beat Indiana? That's what you got to ask. Not, is it good enough to beat Purdue by 40? Is it good enough to beat those teams? If they go out and beat North Carolina 42-7 on the road, that doesn't tell us that all of a sudden, oh, bring on the Buckeyes, baby.
Right.
It could, but it doesn't matter. It's about how you play and how you're growing as a team. And that's why I almost wish these 2 quarters were reversed. I almost wish they started with Purdue, North Carolina, and Stanford, and then got Wisconsin and Michigan State leading into the BYU game. The only saving grace is, I think, against North Carolina, the one thing you will see, and this is why another reason I say that the offense will get somewhat tested this quarter, Trev, is you are going to have a pretty good scheme when you're going against North Carolina's defense. The question is, do they have the players to carry it out? That's a very fair question, but there's no doubt about it that they are going to have a very good scheme. And I think Stanford will as well. You know, they hired Chris Richard as their defensive coordinator, and he came from the NFL and has spent multiple seasons as a defensive coordinator in the NFL. Will their players be any good? Probably not. And that's why I say I think Notre Dame blows them out no matter what. But there's a world in which Miami, BYU, SMU, Ohio State, Indiana, Georgia, Oregon, Texas see things on film in that game from the Notre Dame offense to say, hey, North Carolina and Stanford didn't have good enough players to execute it, but we do. And
Sure.
that schematically gave Notre Dame some problems. And that's why we say process over results, because you are going to face 2 pretty good defensive coordinators where, you know, North Carolina might be a different team next year. If you could transplant the depth chart in the roster from Coral Gables up to Chapel Hill, that's a much different test on defense, brother. Same thing for Stanford. If you could take the players that are in Columbus, Ohio for the Buckeyes and transplant them, you know, over to Palo Alto, Stanford, California, and let them play for the Cardinal, that's a pretty darn good defense right there because of what they have from a coaching standpoint. So that's going to be a very interesting part of this quarter, is evaluating that aspect of the Notre Dame offensive performance. And that's why, especially the line, because those are 2 coaches who are going to have a pretty good idea of how to dial up some coverages to give Notre Dame some problems, some blitz, some pressure packages that could give Notre Dame some problems schematically. And that's something that I'm looking forward to learning from this. Who would you say is the toughest opponent in this schedule, Trev? Do you think it is Stanford?
I do. Yeah, I think it's Stanford.
I'm going North Carolina. Two reasons. One, I think it's a road game. I just think they have a little bit more athleticism. I think Stanford, I think, gives Notre Dame the best battle in trenches of this quarter. No question. I just still think Stanford's way behind athletically on the perimeter, defensively, and to some of a degree on offense, and just the quarterback. I don't know that Billy Edwards will be the quarterback by this time. Like that's the other thing is they got that kid from – where'd they get that kid from? I got to go look him up again. Remember, they had that little kid that they got in the portal that I'm curious to see if they start to utilize him a little bit. You know, really mobile. He's not really a runner per se, but he's an athletic kid. Was really dynamic at the FCS level last year. I'm going to look his name up real quick. Give me a second. Or do they turn it over to Miles O'Neill by then? Does he impress enough? Like, I think there's a world in which, you know, we don't see Billy Edwards. That's something that I think we could maybe see from that.
I think that's fair. Yeah, I think that's very fair. We didn't have one of these before we transition over to Q3. We didn't have a trap game set in Q1. Do you think that there is one in Q2?
There is. Stanford. Yeah, I think honestly, or excuse me, what did I text you? I think I said
you texted me North Carolina.
Yeah. The toughest opponent is North Carolina. The trap game is Stanford because it's leading right into the BYU game. And this is a team that you've pretty much steamrolled the last few years. You know, you had that. There aren't a lot of guys left on the roster from that 22 game where you got beat by them. You know, the current roster is made up of players that have just beat down Stanford the last few years, Trev. I mean, you beat them 49-20 last year, and I think it was like 42-3 when Notre Dame pulled their starters.
Yeah.
You know, year before against Stanford in 2024, you beat them at home 49-7. They scored first, and then you scored 49 unanswered points. And then the year before that, you beat them 56-23 in a game where you just ran the ball all over them, blocked the field goal, ran it back for a touchdown. I mean, you toyed with them early, and but there aren't a whole lot of guys on the roster left from the 22 team that struggled with Stanford. And so I do worry about you're going to see them on film. There's a chance they have a losing record. They don't look great, but they're going to be coached well, and this is going to be a huge game for them. And Notre Dame has dominated them, but not once in the last 3 years since Notre Dame has dominated Stanford have they been afraid of Notre Dame. Notre Dame just has way better players. So I do worry about not losing to Stanford per se, but could this be a funky game that gets Notre Dame out of its comfort zone heading into the BYU game? And it'll be a physical game. But look, I'll say this, Trev, this Stanford team has more talent than the one that beat Notre Dame in 2022. That's the other piece to it.
Without a doubt. I'm with you. I think Stanford is a trap game as well. I am also, and it's not always the case, but more times than not, I also think trap games happen at home. Mm-hmm. You know, just you think of the inner workings of game day. You don't have to travel. You wake up in your own bed. You're doing things that are very familiar to you. And then you have a very physical, and I'm willing to bet that I think Stanford's going to be pretty well coached too. Like they won't be undisciplined. They won't be making unsound mistakes. I think they give them the toughest matchup in the trenches, and it would be very easy for Notre Dame to start looking ahead to that road game out in Provo, because that will be by far their toughest road game of the season. And so I'll be very interested to see what they do against Stanford. But yeah, it's also the trap game for me as well. That's when I think that game more than any, we're going to learn a lot, to your point, about the leadership of this team, the focus of this team, the intentionality of this team. I think it's going to be very interesting.
Agree.
Brian, let's talk about Q3 here on the Irish Breakdown Podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. And this is the one this is kind of the moneymaker, right? This is the one that everybody
card looks a whole lot different than the other cards we've pulled up so far for this show, Trev.
Yes, it sure does. And this is a very interesting quarter. You have a bye week in this quarter. You have your toughest road matchup this quarter. You have your toughest matchup this quarter against Miami. Like I said, I'm a big believer in themes, and the theme for this quarter for Notre Dame, in my eyes, is this is where you make your playoff resume. It happens right here.
This is when you find out who Notre Dame is. This is when you find out, is this really, are they a contender or a pretender? That's what you find out in this quarter. I mean, it really is as simple as that, Trev, because you could make a case. Now, I'm not sure that I would buy this, but I think you can make a case that the three best teams on your schedule in the 2026 season are these three teams.
Agreed completely. They give you multiple different challenges every single week. Navy, it's self-explanatory. You're running the triple option. We'll dive into them a little bit more. But they're also going to be running the triple option that has the potential to be more of the old school triple option, what they ran before Blake Horvath came in with Braxton Woodson stepping in at quarterback.
Yes, so, he's much more of a running. He's more Malcolm Perry than he is Blake Horvath.
Yes, without a doubt. So it could be a little bit different. You get BYU, tough road environment, the hardest road game you'll face all year. You get Bear Bachmeier,
maybe the most physical team you're going to play all year.
Yep. And then the skilled talent with the Hurricanes.
Yeah, I mean, look, Trev, when you look at the schedule, this is also three of the best coach teams that you're going to play too. You know, like I wouldn't have said that about Miami in 2024, but that's where the offseason changes on defense for Miami were made. They were huge last year. They outcoached and outplayed Notre Dame last year. That was not a fluky game. Now, it was a fluky game in that Notre Dame didn't play their typical game, but it wasn't fluky. Like, it's not like they had blown plays. And matter of fact, the blown assignments in that game were for Miami, not covering Eli Raridan and letting him go down the field. Like, their defense was coached very differently under Corey Heatherman than it was under Lance Guidry. BYU is one of the toughest, most disciplined, well-coached teams in all of college football. Now, they have to replace their defensive coordinator who left for Michigan. That's a loss. But they stayed in-house. Aaron Roberts is a guy that when Jared Parker left was on my list of guys I'd look at. I like their scheme offensively. I really do. And they did a heck of a job last year with a true freshman quarterback that was thrust into a tough situation with their starter getting suspended over the summer. So these are three really good football teams. You've had one playoff team in the last 2 years from the stretch, and then another team in BYU that went into November each of the last 2 years with a shot to earn a playoff bid. And last year they went into December with a shot to earn a playoff bid if they beat Texas Tech. So this is your maker. You can use whatever whatever you want to call it, make or break quarter, your prove it quarter, your defining quarter, however you want to, whatever adjectives or slogans you want to put on this quarter. This is the quarter that ultimately is going to define who Notre Dame is in 2026. Like when you talk big picture about this quarter, you're going to find out if you got the toughness to be a championship football team in all three of these games. You're going to find out if you got the ability to go into a tough place, altitude, long trip, a place you've never been, potentially could end up being like an 11 a.m., Mount Central time or a 10 a.m. Mountain time. Like who knows what they're going to do with the kickoff time for this game to Notre Dame. There's a lot that well-coached teams. There's a lot that you're going to learn about this football team. Do you have the athletes to dominate in this quarter? Meaning, let's say it's a wash in the trenches against BYU. I'm not saying I'd be happy about that. Well, your athletes should be good enough to shut BYU down. Do you have the athletes good enough to do that? Texas Tech did last year. You look at Miami. Do you have the athletes to handle them in ways that maybe you didn't last year? Now, you and I would say if we're defending Notre Dame's athleticism compared to Miami, we didn't see Tay Johnson in that game. We didn't see that much of Dallas Golden in that game. We didn't see much of Devontae Smith in that game. We saw a lot of Carson Hobbs and a lot of Jalen Stroman who aren't there anymore. And it was the anomaly game for Leonard Moore, who, he played this guy that played against Ohio State and held his own. He'll be fine.
He'll be okay.
Yeah, he had a bad game. But sorry, I'm putting somebody in timeout. I'm just not in the mood for that today. But I look at this quarter, Trev, and this is, like as I said, this is the defining quarter of the Notre Dame season. It's not just the win-loss record, it's how you play. How do you play in this quarter? it's gonna tell us a lot about this Notre Dame football team. And it's going to tell us a lot about how good, not just how Notre Dame plays, but let's take a step back from the Notre Dame specific aspect of it, Trevor. How these three teams perform this season is going to go a very long way towards determining how difficult the Notre Dame schedule is going to be, which is sort of what this show is about. If the schedule is going to get more respect than we think it's going to get, then quarter one and quarter two have to be better. But if quarter one and quarter two has a bunch of improved teams, let's say North Carolina makes the jump that I think they might be able to. Let's say Stanford's as good as you think they are, because maybe Davis Warren is actually better than we think, and it was actually Sharon Moore that was the problem with Davis Warren. Ryan Brown's the guy we think he can be. Wisconsin does better. And there's a bunch of 6 to 8 win teams in there. The schedule doesn't get respect if the teams in this quarter don't live up to their preseason billing. Because then the narrative is, okay, yeah, you played a bunch of solid teams, but you played nobody great. Or you only played one good team in Miami because BYU and Navy don't live up to expectations. So I think the other part of it is not only is it where we learn a lot about Notre Dame, but the schedule will ultimately be defined. When we talk about the resume, the schedule will be defined by this quarter. And here's where that matters. Let's if we can take a step back, Trev, for a moment.
Oh, yeah.
When we're going into the postseason and you've got a 12-0 Notre Dame, let's just say for example, a 12-0 Notre Dame against a 12-1 Ohio State. Or you could even take Texas, but let's go with Ohio State in this particular instance. So Notre Dame goes 12-1 or 12-0, and Ohio State goes 12-0. They go on the road early in the season. They play at Texas in week 2 and lose by a field goal or lose by touchdown, similar score to similar margin of defeat as what they did over Texas last year, right? Really competitive game. Then Ohio State goes on to beat Illinois, win at Iowa, win at Indiana, win at USC, beat Oregon home, win at Nebraska, win over Michigan, and then beat whoever you beat in the Big Ten title game. That 12-1 against Notre Dame 12-0, if we're talking like battling for the number 1 or number 2 seed, you're like, okay, yeah, you went 12-0, but Miami finished 9-3, BYU went 8-4, SMU went 9-3, Navy was the best team you played, wins-wise, and Miami was the highest-ranked team at number 15. Guess who will and should, in that instance, be seated higher? I'm not someone who believes just because you had a 12-0 record means you should be ranked higher than a team that went 12-1. Because what would your record have been against a team that you had to play Texas, Oregon, Indiana, USC, Michigan, you know what I mean, Trev, at Iowa? And so now if Miami's 12-1 and their only loss is to Notre Dame, and BYU goes 10-2 and they lose one conference game and they only lose to Notre Dame, Navy's in the competition to win the American, now all of a sudden you can say, yeah, you might have played more good teams, but we played these two teams and we handled our business and we played as many top of the board teams as you did. And then, of course, SMU will be part of that too. So not only is Notre Dame going to be defined by this quarter, that how well the teams in this quarter do outside of Notre Dame is going to tell us a lot about how the resume looks at the end of the year when we're talking about seeding, because I could make the same argument that I just made about Ohio State. I could make the same argument about Texas. Let's say Texas beats Ohio State. And let's say that Texas loses at, they lose at LSU to make our guy insured by Big Happy. November 14th, they lose at LSU. But they beat Ohio State at home. They win at Tennessee. They beat Oklahoma in Dallas. They beat Florida. They beat Ole Miss. They beat Mississippi State. They win at Missouri. And then after the loss to, because I think by that point in time, if they're undefeated going into LSU, they're ranked number 1. If they lose in a close game to LSU and then bounce back by beating Arkansas, beating Texas A&M on the road, and then beating Georgia or Alabama or maybe like a rematch against LSU in the SEC title, and Notre Dame sitting there at 12-0, they're 12-1. You look at Ohio State, Texas, and Notre Dame, if this part of the quarter schedule does not play up to its expectations, and say, yeah, I know Notre Dame is 12-0, but who'd they beat? And it has, because like, Trev, there will be people that say that no matter what, but they might have a valid argument if this quarter doesn't live up to expectation. That's why this is the defining quarter of the Notre Dame season, not just by how Notre Dame plays against them. That's obviously a big part of it. But how did they do outside of the Notre Dame game? That, like, if Miami loses their 2, what the heck was that games this year, and loses to Notre Dame, they're 9-3 and they're barely in the top 20. You know what I mean? Like, if Blake Horvath was more important maybe to Navy than even we realize, and they go 7-5 this year, and BYU was kind of smoke and mirrors the last couple of years, and some of those overtime games they won last year, they don't win this year because they lost Jason Hill, a D coordinator, or they don't have Parker Kingston or whatever. Now all of a sudden it's like Notre Dame's 12-0 and they're a 3 seed. I mean, there's a world in which you could make a legitimate case that that's true. That's why I say that there's so much about this quarter that is important for Notre Dame directly on how they play and what we know about Notre Dame, but then also how Notre Dame is viewed when you look at their schedule.
More than anything, Notre Dame needs Miami and BYU to hold serve. I have the confidence that Navy is going to be very well coached and be good enough to be a 9-10 win team, potentially even an 11-win team. But let's be real about something too. We respect Navy and what they provide to Notre Dame's schedule. But by and large, like, there's a reason in 2024, I think, that Notre Dame was never able to pass up Penn State in the rankings down the pike when we were talking about we think they should be ahead. It's because arguably their best win on paper was against Navy. Now, we believe to be, and because it was, that was a very good Navy team, but Texas A&M didn't hold serve. After the Notre Dame game, they went on like a 5-6 game win streak, and then the wheels started to fall off, and they ended the regular season like 8-4, 7-5. That can't happen with either Miami or BYU. Those two teams above anyone need to hold serve and be who we think that they're going to be this upcoming season. That's what carries the validity to this bulk of Notre Dame schedule. I think that's a phenomenal point. I'm with you completely, because that's what they're going to need this year.
Yeah, you need this schedule, and we'll dive into the particulars of the 3 teams, but you need these 3 teams to be as good as we hope and expect them to be. You need BYU to be even if they're not as good as last year, Trev, you need them to at least be as good as they were in 2024. 10-2 team, not really in the playoff hunt by the end of the season, but like, a good football team. And you need Miami to look like they did most of last year.
Yep.
You need them to at least be 10-2 with a win over you, because if Miami's 10-2 at the end of the year, let's just say Miami has that one game. I mean, like, and we're not talking trash on them because Notre Dame's had those. Northern Illinois, anyone? Marshall, anyone? Stanford, anyone? But you also need to be able to say about Miami that what the heck was that game?
Yeah.
Like losing to SMU and Louisville last year, blowing a 20-0 lead to Syracuse, losing to a 7-6 Georgia Tech team the year before. They can't tend to have some of those games. Let's say they have one of those and they lose to Notre Dame. Well, if that's the case, they're playing for the ACC championship. Let's say they win that. They're 11-2. They're a top 10. They're a playoff team. They're a top 10 team. Like they're good. They're very good. I mean, that's the thing you look at, Trev, is they don't have to be 12-1 and their only loss being the Notre Dame. It's just they've got to be playing for the ACC championship and have no more than 2 losses. And they need all of those things to be true. Because even if SMU plays for the ACC title, you will not get the same credit for beating an ACC title playing SMU team as you will an ACC title playing Miami team. Fair or not, right or not, whatever. I'm just talking reality. That's what we'll see.
Without a doubt. I mean, we're talking about 3 teams in here that, and obviously the FanDuel odds aren't out yet for any of their over-under win totals or anything like that. But talk about 3 potential conference winners here too. I mean, I expect BYU to be over their 8.5 win total, even with Texas Tech's quarterback situation. The Red Raiders are still the favorites on FanDuel to win the Big 12. I think once an official decision has been made and he's been officially declared out for the 26th season, I could see BYU vaulting up into that spot. Miami right now at a 10.5 over-under win total is the favorites to win the ACC, with the second place team being SMU, a team we'll talk about here in a little bit. But we're talking about 3 potential conference winning teams here just in Q3. And I think that's going to be very interesting for Notre Dame as well. But, Brian, diving into each of these teams, it does start with BYU, their toughest road matchup of the season. It's a game that you said that they haven't played out in Provo before, which I also didn't know that. I thought at some point in their history they had played out in Provo before.
They have.
Oh.
In 04, they played at Provo and lost the opener. Raymond McKnight caught a little tunnel screen for a touchdown to make that close. But, yeah, they lost at Provo in 2004. That's the only other time they've been out in Provo.
Gotcha.
Was that year.
Gotcha. So, yeah, but it's going to be a big one. BYU is an absolutely fascinating team to follow. I mean, it's a lot of people have written them off because they don't have Parker Kingston. I understand it. You lose your, number one wide receiver. Really, they lost two of their leading receivers from last season. When you think about Parker Kingston's most likely going to be suspended and not able to play. And then they also lost where did he go? They also lost Chase Roberts, who was their second leading receiver on the team last year.
Those are two good football players. Two good football players. And Trev, I forgot that could completely slip my mind. This was before you were born. They also played at BYU in 93. They played out in Provo in 1990. It's been so long. The thing is, I'm glad they're playing this game because Notre Dame has owed BYU this game for a while. And Notre Dame not honoring the remainder of that contract bothered me. I'll be honest about that. Like, from what I understand, Texas and Notre Dame sort of talked BYU into going independent. Remember, they were in the Mountain West Conference.
Yeah.
And the promise was, hey, we'll play you, we'll do this, we'll do that. And then neither really honored those agreements. Notre Dame owed them a game out in Provo and just not refused to play, but like just quote unquote didn't make it work, couldn't make it work. I didn't like that. I thought that was shady. I think there's legitimate beef for BYU fans to not like Notre Dame for that reason. Like you convinced us to do this because you said you'd have our back and you didn't have our back. I get it. So I'm glad to see this game finally happen because now you can hey, look, we came out and played you, and I'm kind of hoping that the environment is great for Notre Dame. Like the Notre Dame, what I mean great is like it's a big game, the pageantry, a big crowd, fireworks. I hope there's a lot of that because I hope that Notre Dame loves the experience, like the leadership. They treat the AD great. They treat Notre Dame. Hey. Don't do that. Oh, put them in a, this problem, that problem, try to make it comfortable for them. Number one, I've always felt that making a team comfortable is actually better for you than putting them in these tough situations. Cause I know when I coached, if you're going to try to come up, we would recognize that. And that would kind of piss us off and kind of galvanize us more than anything. Like, hey, it's us versus the world. It's like lay out the red carpet, get us thinking we're big time, and then punch us in the mouth. That would be more of my approach. But my hope is that if they do that the Notre Dame administration might be more willing to do something more long-term with BYU, which you and I have both have said for months is something we support. I found it funny the last couple of weeks, see all these articles, because once one person does it, everybody does it. Yeah. Notre Dame and BYU should play each other. Yeah, I mean, where have you guys been? We said that in December when they scheduled this home and home.
I was about to say, man, that echo gets farther and farther away.
It does, bro. It's like, hey, what do you guys think about this? I don't know. Why don't you go watch the show we did about this in December and let us know what you think we think about this. But the point is, I would love it if it was a great environment that makes Notre Dame say, you know what, this is what college football is about. This is a team that's willing to play us more consistently. Let's do it. So I'd love to see that played more regularly. But if it's like a janky environment and they're not treated well and it's the hotel situation is tough and BYU people are just kind of, prickly. And I don't care about fans. I'm talking about the leadership. And Notre Dame may say, hey, we're going to beat you down and then, screw you. We don't have any desire to go back to that place again. I'm kind of hoping it's a great environment, because I'd love to see Notre Dame and Clemson play each other more, or BYU play each other more consistently. That's kind of where I'm at. So, but when you look at this BYU team, Trevor, I think the biggest loss for them this offseason could be Jay Hill. Jason Hill, their defensive coordinator. I thought he did a really nice job for them the last few years. I thought their defense was gritty. They were tough. They were well coached. They don't have great athletes usually, but this year they actually have a pretty good secondary.
Yes.
They actually have a legit Evan Johnson's a really good football player. for them. Like Therian Alexander is a really good football player for them. Jonathan Kabay is a talented football player. This is a pretty good secondary. The question for them is actually going to be more, you have some pretty good players in the front seven that you have to replace. That's going to be a bit more of a question for me, Trev, is how are they in the trenches on defense? But they do have Keanu Tanavasa coming back. But this is going to be the best secondary that they will have played up to this point in time in the season. This will also likely be the best pass game challenge that Notre Dame has faced up to this point in time in the season, because the one difference about this BYU team compared to past BYU teams is this one has a legitimate Power 4, really good, borderline top 10 nationally secondary. That's going to tell us a little something about these Notre Dame wide receivers.
Without a doubt. I'm glad you highlighted them, man, because BYU secondary is very, very slept on. Evan Johnson and Therian Alexander are great. The safety, I'm going to butcher his name, Faletau Satuala.
Yeah.
I apologize.
We got to learn their nicknames. That's what we got to do. We got to like find them on Twitter and Instagram and see if they have nicknames. It makes it a lot easier to do.
I know, man. We need to find, but he was their leading tackler from last season. He had 83 tackles, 4 passes defended, 3 interceptions. He is a legit dude in their secondary on the back end as well. And then Brian, a guy that we were talking about before the show, linebacker Cade Uluave from California. Mm-hmm. He comes over and he transfers in as well. He's a guy that, I mean, man, he had 97 tackles, 3 sacks, 4 passes defended. He's joining a solid linebacking core because they return Isaiah Glasker and Ciala Esura. You're right. I got to get better at these BYU names. Have some time before October, the week of October.
Yeah, a lot of practice. A lot of practice. We're going to have that, yeah.
Yeah, but this is going to be a very talented back end of the defense. But I'm with you. How well they answer losing edge rusher Logan Latui, defensive tackle, John Tuamopiao. Those are going to be huge for them, man, because those are some impactful players. I'm with you completely.
Yeah, the one thing about BYU that I wonder is how talented are they in the trenches? That's a question. But what I think is what's going to make this a great test and a test that gets you ready for Miami, or at least gives you sort of a, it's the physicality that BYU plays with. Like, they're not a ground and pound offense. They like to mix it up, but they're physical in how they play just football in general. Kalani Sitake's team gets after it. So you're not going to play Miami 3 weeks later, because there's a bye week after this. You're not going to play Miami 3 weeks later and be like, wow, we've never played a physical football team before. Now, Miami's going to have a different type of athlete on the field, but BYU is going to get you ready for that trench battle. And if you can handle yourself in the trenches in this game, then you got a shot. When you look at BYU overall, Trevor, and we've talked a lot about, look, how will they be viewed? I think their schedule actually sets up, in my opinion, relatively well for them to have another 10-win season. They get Utah Tech in the opener, then they get Arizona at home, Colorado State on the road, then a bye. This is one of their tough tests at TCU. That'll be a battle. I don't know how TCU is going to be this year. Then they get Iowa State at home, then Notre Dame, then they're at UCF. Now comes what I believe to be their toughest stretch of the season outside of the Notre Dame game. They play Arizona State, Utah, Baylor, and Kansas. The good news is that they get Arizona State at home and they get Baylor at home. They got to play at Utah, but I don't know how good Utah is going to be this year with that new coaching staff. We'll know by then. But, the Holy War is always going to be a competitive game, and then they play at Kansas, and how's Kansas going to be without Jalen Daniels? So that stretch right there, in my opinion, is ultimately what's going to tell us if BYU is a 10-2, 9-3 type of team or an 8-4, 7-5 type of team. There's some people in the chat that were like, hey, I'm taking the under with BYU. Whether you take the under or the over, it's not that I'm trying to debate, oh, you're wrong, they're going to go over. I don't know. I'm not. If I knew that, I'd have a lot more money because I would actually be gambling and I would, make a lot more money. But I don't gamble because you can't know these things. But what I do feel confident in saying, Trevor, is how they perform in that, coming out of Notre Dame, at UCF, home against Arizona State, at Utah, home against Baylor, at Kansas, home against Cincinnati. That stretch run is going to tell us who BYU is. And hopefully they come out of that, well. Again, no worse than 10-2 because 9-3 BYU is borderline top 25, just with the lack of respect the Big 12 gets.
Yeah.
Especially if Notre Dame smacks them. If it's a close game against Notre Dame, 9-3 BYU might be ranked. But if Notre Dame smacks them, and I'm not saying they will, I'm just making a point, then they're borderline top 25 team. So that we need to see them as Notre Dame fans. We need to see them not hold serve at home. That's the big thing. Hold serve at home outside of Notre Dame. Beat Arizona, beat Iowa State, beat Arizona State, beat Baylor, beat Cincinnati. I think Arizona State's going to be a really good team this year, Trev. They might be my favorite team in the Big 12 now that Texas Tech doesn't have a quarterback that scares me that much. I think Arizona State, BYU, and Texas Tech are the three my top three teams in the Big 12 for this year, which is a little bit of a preview of our Big 12 preview here down the road. But I like this Arizona State football team this year, as long as they can stay a little bit healthier than last year. If you get a win over them late October at home, and your only loss up to that, and you have a win at TCU, and your only loss is to Notre Dame, regardless of score, you're a top 15 team. And then you go on the road and beat Utah. Now, all of a sudden, BYU's a borderline playoff team, bro. Like that. That's why I say that stretch coming out of Notre Dame is going to be so important for BYU and going to ultimately tell us who they are as a football team, which then in turn, how that impacts the Notre Dame schedule.
I'm with you completely. That Arizona State team could give BYU those same matchup problems that Texas Tech did last year. Better athletes on the perimeter. Some of it will be dictated by quarterback play, but I'm with you there completely. But BYU they are in a good position to be the playoff bid out of the Big 12, and Notre Dame absolutely needs it. Let's talk a little bit about the Navy midshipmen, man, because this is a very interesting matchup. I mentioned earlier that I'm under the belief that they could very well go back to the triple option team that they were before Blake Horvath. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of people are willing to talk about what Notre Dame did to Navy the last two times that they matched up, but there's a chance that this will be the first time in a couple seasons that Notre Dame faces Navy with a starting quarterback that's actually supposed to be the starting quarterback. Like Blake Horvath in 2024 played against Notre Dame, and he was hurt. And it was very clear that he was hurt. And then he was ruled out like 2 hours before kickoff.
Right.
Because 2025.
To your point, Trevor, Notre Dame ended up facing Braxton Woodson all game last year.
Yep.
And he ran on him pretty effectively. He had over 100 yards. And now the Navy defense had no answer for the Notre Dame offense, but Navy's offense moved the ball okay early. But to your point, they were preparing for a different looking offense than the one that they saw. There were some wrinkles we saw in that game that you're not necessarily doing with Blake Horvath, the quarterback. So I love the point you're making is even though they faced a Braxton Woodson offense last year, it was a different look. You had Eli Heidenreich who got drafted. It was a more modern triple option is what you broke down on film. This triple option you're going to be breaking down on film is going to be a little bit different. Now, I do think Braxton Woodson can throw well for a triple option quarterback.
Sure.
So, like, he's got some Keenan Reynolds to him as a passer, but he's not Will Worth. He's not Blake Horvath as a passer. It's going to look more like, a running quarterback type of deal. So I like that point. And as we wrap up quarter three, Trevor, Navy, to me with Navy, it's not so much about can they beat Notre Dame. The answer is no, I don't think they can, and they flip and better not. And it better not only that, it better not even be a close game.
No.
But what I'll say is okay, who is Navy going to be overall? That I think is the bigger question because they do have some big losses. I mean, look, they lost their starting quarterback, who was one of the better quarterbacks they've had. To me, I put him the only knock I have on that keeps him from being on this level is he just had a harder time staying healthy.
Yeah.
But when he was on the field, I put him in the Malcolm Perry, Keenan Reynolds. What was the kid they had in 09 and 10? I'm drawing a complete blank on him. The kid they gave Ricky Dobbs. Ricky Dobbs. They had some really good players. They also had Eli Heidenreich, who was a dude who got drafted. And then, of course, they had Alex Teska, who was a good player as well. They also had Brandon Chapman, who averaged 8-9 yards a carry. They lose a lot from last year's team. Now, the good news is Navy returns, I believe, 4 starting offensive linemen, which is good. But their defensive line loses a lot. Landon Robinson got drafted. Are you talking about how well they're building that program? They had, I think, 2 guys get drafted last year. Didn't Landon Robinson also get drafted last year?
Yeah.
And then Eli Heidenreich got drafted last year. So when I'd be curious when the last time Navy, I'm actually going to look that up, when the last time Navy had multiple players drafted in the same draft. But and that didn't even include Horvath. The last time that Navy had 2 players drafted in the same draft was 1961.
Wow.
So, but they've had 3 players drafted in the last 2 years, which is showing that Navy is elevating their high level of a play. And that doesn't include Teska, who didn't get drafted, and Blake Horvath, who didn't get drafted. So it's more so, hey man, how are they going to do the rest of the way? How are they going to do outside of that game? How are they going to perform against their schedule? They play at Towson, at Florida Atlantic, at UAB, at Air Force. So they start on the road a lot. Home against Tulsa, at UTSA, home against North Texas, home against Temple, home against Memphis, at Charlotte, and then, of course, Army. So they don't get Tulane. They don't get South Florida. So, and then they get Memphis at home. So, their schedule's manageable in the AAC. Not super easy, but manageable. Can they be a 10-win team again? That's all I'm asking for. I expect Notre Dame to blow Navy out again. But outside of that, can they be at least 10-1? That's going to be big for Notre Dame, because if they are, they'll be ranked again.
Yep, without a doubt. Navy is a good enough team to be ranked this year. I like Braxton Woodson at quarterback. It's just how well do you supplement those losses? I'm with you. And obviously, as we know, Navy's not a team that can just go to the transfer portal to supplement their losses the way that every other team on this roster can. I'm with you 100%. Figured this was kind of a rhetorical question, Brian, but I'm assuming we're both going with the Miami Hurricanes as the toughest opponent in Q3.
Oh, it's not even close. I mean, Miami's the toughest opponent on the schedule, period. When you look at this Miami team, Trevor, I don't have any doubts about Miami's talent. It's the most talented team on the schedule. It's, last year's run was great, but look, they lost a lot of kids from that run. They lost their quarterback. And look, say whatever you want about Carson Beck. He was excellent in postseason.
Yeah, he was.
Now, first 2 games, it was decision-making, scrambling. I think the biggest play he made against Ohio State was a run where he had to just dove for the first down, had made some big-time plays against Ole Miss in that win. Didn't put up big numbers against A&M, but didn't make mistakes, got the ball where it needed to get to when they needed it to get there. I look at it and say, yeah, that's a big loss, but you're getting a pretty good quarterback. Somebody in the chat, Chief, my guy Chief, just said, I love you, man. But there's a debate going on in the chat about how good is Darian Mensah, which I'm like, hey, that's not really what we're talking about right now, but it's close enough to where I let it go. But somebody said, I could see Mensah struggle in November. Let's be real. What environment and conditions will he have been and prepare him for that? And my answer is, he'll be, other than Notre Dame, he'll be playing the same teams in November that he's played at Duke last year. He didn't transfer from Tulane last year. He transferred from Duke, an ACC team. In November last year, he went on the road and threw for 361 yards and 4 touchdowns in a road win over Clemson, where this defense gave up 45 points. They played Virginia and he threw for over 200 yards, didn't play great, then got Virginia back by playing well in the title game. Went on the road and won a game at North Carolina, played great against Wake Forest. Mid-October, just rips up Georgia Tech, throws for 373 yards against Georgia Tech. Went on the road, passed for over 300 yards against Tulane, passed for over 300 yards against Illinois. I don't know that he's a elite quarterback, but let's not pretend that he just transferred in from the FCS level. He transferred in from the FCS or from the FBS, from a Power 4 school, and from a Power 4 school in the conference he transferred to. There's no projection here. So he'll also have a far better supporting cast than what he had at Duke last year. So, yeah, it's the best quarterback that they're going to play this year. There's no question. It's the most talented receiving core, in my opinion, possibly in the country, top to bottom, not just the number one guy, but Ohio State has 1 proven stud. They've got 2 proven studs at Miami. So, their tight end comes back. Their offensive line is remade, but it's very talented. You could argue you have more first-round skill sets on the offensive line this year than you did last year. And Samson Okunlola and Jackson Cantwell. Thank you. So I just think some of you in the chat are doing exactly what you did last offseason when we had the conversation about Miami. And I pushed back on it last year as well. This is not Randy Shannon's Miami. This is not, the Miami of Manny Diaz. This is a legitimately really good Miami team. Yes, they're going to have some what the heck was that clunkers, but they just flat out beat Notre Dame last year. Beat them in the trenches. Their guys made plays in clutch moments in situations when Notre Dame's guys didn't. Yeah, the SMU loss was bad. Yes, the loss to Louisville was bad. Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois the year that they played for the national championship, right? That stuff happens. They also, last year, crushed Pitt on the road in a must-win game, went on the road and beat Texas A&M in the playoff game, beat Ole Miss in a neutral field in a playoff game, and gave Miami a much tougher game than anybody other than Ohio State gave Indiana last year. And had chances to win that game. Now, I think Indiana outplayed them in that game. But Miami did not back down. And they're going to be more talented on offense this year at skill position than they were last year. Is their line going to be good enough? Who knows? But I think somebody said with a new quarterback in a DC and still won only by 3 at home. What are you talking about? Only won by 3? They beat Notre Dame, dude, who also had a new D coordinator and also had a new quarterback. They beat Notre Dame in the trenches from start to finish. You guys have got to stop doing this in the chat. You did the same thing last year when I tried to tell you that Miami was going to be better than some of you thought they were going to be. There's no excusing that loss. Miami beat them. They outcoached Notre Dame last year, y'all. They outplayed Notre Dame. They beat Notre Dame in the trenches last year. And yes, Carson Beck was new. He had not played at Miami before. He had less experience running the Miami offense than what C.J. Carr had running the Notre Dame offense, and was coming off of a major arm injury. And they didn't beat Notre Dame because of Carson Beck. They beat Notre Dame because they beat Notre Dame in the trenches in that game. They outcoached Notre Dame. We're seeing a repeat of what we saw last year. So we're in this kind of world of like, oh, what's Darian Mensah proven? He played in the same league last year. He's playing in this year and threw for almost 4,000 yards. This team won every single game away from home in the playoffs last year. 3-1 playoffs, every game away from home. They had to travel in the first round. Notre Dame got a home game. So let's not talk ourselves into this thing we did last year where we're talking down Miami. There's no need for that. I've never understood this about Notre Dame fans. You want to push back against the narrative of, well, Notre Dame doesn't beat anybody, and say, yeah, this team is better. But then when you talk about that team compared to Notre Dame, we want to act like they're not good. This is a really good freaking football team. This is a top 10 preseason football team based on their talent and based on what they proved the year before. This will be the best passing quarterback they play all year. This will be the best receiving core they play all year, maybe even including the postseason. It's going to be the most talented offensive line they play all year. It's probably going to be the best defensive line they play all year. And it'll be one of the 3 or 4 best secondaries they play all year. This is a legitimate national title contending team. If you guys respect our opinion at all, let's not forget that we had Miami as a consensus top 6 roster in all of college football. I believe I had them 5, you had them 6, or maybe we both had them 5, but it was very close. Maybe I had them 6, you had them 5. So I don't understand why some people in the chat are going to the mattresses to try to act like Darian Mensah is not a really good quarterback or that Miami's not a really good football team. If Darian Mensah struggles at Notre Dame in November, it's not because he's not good. It's because that team is really freaking good. That's why he'll struggle. So I saw Caleb Williams struggle in October. Yeah, because Notre Dame was really good that day. I also saw Caleb Williams go on the road and play well in big environments. It's like you talk a guy down, and then when they don't play well, you're now minimizing the good for Notre Dame. It's not about what has he done to prepare him for that. I don't know. He didn't play at Georgia. He's a heck of a quarterback. And if he does struggle against Notre Dame, it's because Notre Dame's really good. Not because he hasn't been prepared for this or that. What's the environment that Notre Dame played in, will play in before that moment to have them prepared to host Miami? Like, it's a silly argument, to be completely honest with you, Trevor. I don't understand why we're doing this as a fan base, why we're trying to once again convince ourselves. Like, it's like we're trying to convince that like this person over here is ugly to make me feel better about how I look. I look how I look. That guy's a good-looking dude, or that's a good-looking lady, or whatever. That's a great football team. And if Notre Dame beats them, it means Notre Dame is a great football team. I don't understand why we're having some of these conversations in the chat. I don't. That's a really good football team. And we need them as Notre Dame fans to be as good as you and I think they're going to be, because if they're not, then it's going to be a big knock on Notre Dame's schedule, because this is the only team. Thank you, Paul. He said, "You're very handsome, Brian." Thank you, my friend. This is the only team that you'll get respect for beating them if they're a top 10 to 12 team. If BYU's top 10, you won't get the same respect for beating them as you will beating a top 10 Miami. If you beat a top 10 SMU team, you will not get the same respect for beating them if you beat a top 10 Miami. That's just a fact. And so we better all hope that Miami's as good as Trevor and I think they're going to be this year. There were understandable reasons for skepticism last year. There aren't this year, in my opinion. That was a good football team. That this isn't the A&M game. They didn't luck into beating Notre Dame. They beat Notre Dame. Now, do I think if they played in October, November, Notre Dame wins? Of course I do, but they didn't. This is a really good football team. And how well they do outside of Notre Dame is going to tell us a lot about the Notre Dame schedule as a whole. This is the team more than any other that Notre Dame desperately needs to be as good as advertised this season. I hope they suck on November 7th, but I hope they're really good in all the other games, because this is where you can, if Miami's as good as we hope they are, then that debate we were talking about earlier about Notre Dame, an undefeated Notre Dame against a one-loss Texas or one-loss Ohio State, now becomes moot. Because, hey, guys, did you see what they did to number 5 Miami in November? Miami killed everybody else, but did you see what happened when they went up to South Bend? Right? Like, that's what they need to happen.
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, because that's what Notre Dame did for Miami last year. Notre Dame went on a 10-game win streak to end the regular season all by double digits. That factored into it. Like, that's why a lot of people are like, head-to-head matters. It's okay. But one of the reasons why, like, they wouldn't have said that if Notre Dame was 8-4. It's because they were dominant down the stretch. Notre Dame needs that to be Miami as well. It's a little bit different because they need Miami to dominate leading into that game. I'm with you completely, man. It's the toughest game on their schedule. It is. And there's just not a debate otherwise. Anything outside of that, it'd be tough for me to listen to. I'm with you completely. We talked about it in some of the other quarters here too, Brian. But is there a trap game in this quarter in your eyes?
Yeah, it's Navy. Sandwich in between your two biggest games, even with the bye after BYU, it's still very much a trap game. Now, is it trap game that you could lose? I hope not. But trap game in that you're overlooking them because you got Miami coming down the next way? Yeah, in that regard, it absolutely can. Absolutely. It's them, no question.
Yeah, in this quarter for sure. It's just it has all the makings of it. We can have a debate where we split hairs about like they have the bye beforehand. It's the only team on the schedule that you do install for in fall camp before you play them. But because of that game against Miami the week before or the week after, and the game against BYU the week before, it absolutely is. I'm with you completely.
Yeah, this might be the biggest trap game on the schedule all season, just because of where it's sandwiched. I mean, you want to say like, well, I mean, how can Navy, your longest rival that's left on your schedule, be a trap game? And it's because of this is the epitome of a trap game, right? It's about what's on both sides. You know, like that's the big thing is like, it's easy to look at that team when you're coming off the BYU game, whether you're excited over a big win or dejected over a big loss, and then it's got to fester for an extra week because you have a bye. And then you got Miami come down the road where there's going to be a lot of payback talk and revenge tour and all that, and you overlook the team that you've smacked the last few years. That's a big difference.
Without a doubt. Be very interested to see how they handle that. I'm with you completely.
Yeah.
Brian, let's talk about Q4 for Notre Dame here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. And this is the quarter where they have the opportunity to take everything home. Their mantra this entire season, all offseason, has been leave no doubt, leave no doubt. This is the quarter that you can do that. This is the quarter that you can go out and show it's like, okay, let's just play out this hypothetical. They beat BYU on the road. They handle business against Navy. They beat Miami in a close game in South Bend. Notre Dame is undefeated. They're ranked inside of the top 4 in the country. All they have to do is win out, but do it convincingly, because now we're talking about seeding. 2 of these 3 teams, I don't think have a shot to just beat Notre Dame if they don't play well.
They'd have to play really bad.
Yes.
To not win 2 of these 3 games. Yes, I agree.
But this is going to be a very interesting quarter. You have a rivalry game in this quarter. You play SMU in this quarter, which is by far the most difficult senior day opponent that they have faced under Marcus Freeman.
In forever.
Yeah. I mean,
like, I honestly can't remember the last time a good team came to Notre Dame Stadium on senior day.
Yes. This is, above all else, this is the quarter where you can go out and prove your season-long mantra of leave no doubt. You have to be able to do that in this quarter if you're Notre Dame. And talking about Notre Dame's schedule in this quarter, they're going to need some of these teams to be a little bit better than what even FanDuel on this graphic is expecting them to be. One of them, I just flat out, I don't really have a whole lot of faith in, and that's Boston College. Yeah. But Syracuse, I think SMU is going to be better than an 8.5 over-under win total. That's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out.
So I one of the things, and this is Lou Emoji's fault. Lou got me into, he would point out these things of like trends, and this happened then, and if it happens again, and there'd be things like I think he picked like Notre Dame to lose to Texas in 2016 because he's like, they've beaten Texas so many times in a row, it doesn't happen that you win another one, and then they went out and lost to Texas. It was really fascinating. Like, and every time he would point this out, like what he said, this is why it's going to happen, would like almost always end the way that Lou said. It was fascinating watching his brain work in so many different ways. And one of the things that I've kind of got into is like, for Notre Dame to do this, there's some demons they have to exercise. And there's been several along the way. You know, beating Stanford is something that's helped them elevate. But here's one for you. Notre Dame has, the last time that Notre Dame's last era of dominance was from 1988 to 1993. Would you agree with that? An era where they won a title. They were legit title contenders. They could beat anybody, anywhere, any place, anytime. You know, they were winning. You think about from 88 to 93, they won 2 Cotton Bowls over top 10 Texas A&M teams. One was top 5. They won an Orange Bowl over number 1 Colorado. They lost an Orange Bowl by a point to number 1 Colorado. They beat Florida in the Sugar Bowl. Like, I mean, they beat West Virginia in the Fiesta Bowl. Like, they were a great team. You know, they had a year where they went 12-1 and had 7 wins over top 15 teams. They won a title in a year where they beat 3 top 5 teams. You know what I mean? That was the last glory era of Notre Dame. Now, they've had some stretch where 10 win every year, but like where they were truly like, they were what Ohio State and Bama and other teams have been for stretches in the last 30 years. They were that team. And it all died at the end of that era. The 1993 season is the year in which it all died. And I can point to the day that it died. It died, Trevor, inside Notre Dame Stadium around a little after 4 o'clock on Saturday, November 20th. It was a week after the biggest win inside Notre Dame Stadium since 1988. One of the biggest wins ever inside Notre Dame Stadium. A week after the game of the century, the true game of the century, 1 versus 2, Notre Dame versus Florida State. Heisman Trophy winner Charlie Ward. Notre Dame gets that win. And they're on the verge. They're 2 games away from Lou Holtz winning his 2nd national title, 12th overall at Notre Dame. And that era died a week later. That era of greatness died a week later. At home, a week after beating a Florida powerhouse a national title contender. It died inside Notre Dame Stadium at the hands of Boston College. That loss ended that stretch. Now, they beat A&M in the Cotton Bowl. But the next year, Notre Dame went 6-5-1, and they were not a true title contender again until 2024 to now. They have an opportunity here in November to exercise those demons a little bit, Trevor. They have an opportunity in November 7th. Can you beat a powerhouse program, a team that played for the national title last year, a team that beat you last year, a team that has beaten you now 2 straight games, beat you in 2017, another year where Notre Dame had a chance to play for a title. If Notre Dame beats Miami and Stanford in November of 2017, they're in the playoffs as the 1 or 2 seed in 2017. And I think that team would have had a chance to win it all. That was not a great Alabama team. That was not a great Clemson team. They would have knocked out a great Georgia team. As long as Notre Dame didn't have to play Oklahoma, I think they'd have been okay in the postseason that year. And then a week later, November 14th, almost a week away from 33 years to the day when your last golden era died, I think this is your chance to kind of exercise that demon. You play a powerhouse Florida team a week before at home. Week later, you get Boston College coming back to town. Now, it's not the last game of the regular season like it was in the past, but I truly believe this is an opportunity for Notre Dame to kind of exercise some of those last remaining demons that have to be exercised before they can truly restore the program to glory, which is to win a championship, which is ultimately what you can't have a glory era at Notre Dame that doesn't involve a period in which you've won a title. You can be runner-up as much as you want, but that's not what defines greatness at Notre Dame. You got to win it all. And that's why I look at this November 7th at the end of quarter 3, into quarter 4. Quarter 4 starts off with an opportunity, Trevor, to cast out those remaining demons inside that haunt Notre Dame Stadium that have existed since David Gordon kicked that stupid left-footed field goal to beat Notre Dame 41-39. Since Pete Bursich dropped that interception on that drive. And that's why this game, for me as an older fan, maybe I'm the only one that feels this way, but that's why this game to me means a little something else. This is that final demon that needs to be exercised on their path to returning to where they should be.
Full disclosure, I don't really know how I'm supposed to follow up that intro to Notre Dame playing Boston College. But that was very well said.
Thank you.
Very well said.
That's why I pay myself the big bucks.
100%.
But I do think it's important, though, Trevor, now looking at it 26, to follow up that Miami game to show, hey, we didn't put so much into that game that we don't understand what's still in front of us. And that's where I think the BC game, beyond the big picture, the exercising demons, just kind of looking at it this season, how you perform after Miami tells us how was all your focus geared towards revenge against Miami, and now you've got that, season ended, or is Miami just a roadblock to your ultimate revenge, which is we're not just trying to get revenge against Miami, we're trying to get revenge against the college football world.
Yeah. For a lot of the reasons that you just laid out, man, I would argue, and I do think that it's Navy, but you could argue that Boston College is also the biggest trap game of the season for the scenario that you just laid out.
Yep. Because
you could be coming off of a massive win the week prior against Miami. I mean, we're talking about a matchup that could potentially be 1 versus 2, 2 versus 3, 3 versus 4.
Yeah,
exactly. Like we could be talking about a potential top 5 matchup under the lights in South Bend, which would just be absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, I hope that's the case. And
Me
real
too,
quick,
man.
Don't lose your train of thought. But to back up Trevor's point, before Miami plays Notre Dame, they play Stanford, Florida A&M, Wake Forest, Central Michigan, at Clemson, which could be tough, Florida State, Pitt, North Carolina. Barring them just laying an egg or Clemson being a lot better than people think, Miami's undefeated. And if they're undefeated, I don't think they're any worse than third or fourth. If Notre Dame's undefeated, I don't think they're any worse than third or fourth. And there's a world in which Ohio State beats Texas, Texas beats Ohio State, and then Texas ends up going and losing a game against the team that they play, because there's some losable games. They play at Tennessee, Oklahoma neutral field, at Missouri. And then, so there's a world, well, actually Missouri games before, but Texas has to beat Ohio State, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Florida, and Ole Miss before that November 7th weekend. Let's say Ohio State beats Texas, but then Ohio State would then have to beat Iowa on the road, Indiana on the road, and USC on the road to be ranked ahead of those two teams. So there is an outside chance it's 1 versus 2. But I'm pretty confident in saying if it's not 1 versus 2, it's no worse than somebody in the top 4 against somebody else in the top 4 if they both handle their business before that game. So to your point, Trev, massive, massive game. And then you come into the BYU game, BC game, who they won't have a very good record.
Won't have a good record, easy to overlook. And like we said at the start of this segment, man, you're having your toughest matchup on Senior Day the week after by a mile. I mean, this is better than the 22 season where they played Boston College on Senior Day. This is better than the 24 season when they played Virginia on Senior Day. This is, SMU, you want to talk about teams that have the potential to come into matchups undefeated. SMU could be a 1-loss or a none-loss team coming into Senior Day in South Bend. So there's a lot that could be riding on that as well. Now, one of the things that is going in the favor of Notre Dame is that they did not play well against Boston College last year in Chapel Hill.
Yep.
Or in Chestnut Hill. That is one thing that is going for Notre Dame in this game, to where I don't know if Marcus Freeman would allow his team to be like, hey, this is a team where we had to have like a 94-yard touchdown run and do all these things to like really put it away against a really bad Boston College team.
Mm-hmm.
So you do have that going for you, but with all of the history involved with this game, the implications dating back to 1993 that Brian very stoically laid out,
that this team won't care about. This is more of a higher arching kind of look at it. Yeah,
sure. But still, all factors on the table of storylines from all these things. It's the same thing with, none of these players were alive during the Catholics versus Convicts game, but that will be a storyline during that.
You weren't even alive. And the Catholics I was only 10 when that happened. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be huge. Now, roster-wise, there's nothing that Boston College can do to match up with Notre Dame at any position group. This is one of the common themes that we've talked about outside of Q3. We've talked about teams that need to perform a little bit above where they are projected to be. Out of all 12 teams on Notre Dame's schedule, I have the least amount of faith in Boston College being able to do that.
Yep. And it's mainly because their head football coach.
It is. Bill O'Brien, that era has not started out. It started out 7-6. Things were looking up. Very disappointing year, going 2-10 and 1-7 in conference.
They had way too much talent to be how bad they were last year.
Yeah, man.
Way too much talent to be that bad.
And all of that talent is now gone. They only bring back 2 guys on offense, Jaden Skeet and Michael Krauts, come back on offense, and then on defense.
He had 13 catches last year.
Yeah. It's just the outlook for Boston College this season is not great, but all of that kind of plays into Notre Dame can't afford to have a bad, ugly game.
Yep. No, they have to dominate that game. Now, I'll be honest with you, Trevor. If they beat Miami, I honestly see a world in which they will struggle in the first quarter of that game.
Oh, sure.
I could see that. I could see where they just come out flat and just it's hard to replicate the energy you're going to exhaust. They're going to be wiped in the Miami game.
Oh, no doubt. You're in the same setting even. Same setting, same stadium a week later, but it's not a night game. There's a chance that the weather might suck. You know what I mean? Like, it's the recipe for just a real interesting matchup. On paper, Boston College should not be anywhere within 20 to 25 points of Notre Dame in this game.
And that's with Notre Dame playing in an off game.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. But all their focus could be on the SMU Mustangs, who come to town the following week. And that is a game that Notre Dame has to not trying to think of how to word this. That is a game where Notre Dame has to bring above their C plus game just to beat SMU. This is going to be a good football team too, man.
Yeah, look, BC's bad. They went 2-10 with it, and they only had a couple competitive games in there. Like they had the close loss early to Michigan State, and they had the close loss to Georgia Tech. The rest of their games were beatdowns. I mean, they got smacked in a lot of games. You look at SMU, they had a very interesting year last year, Trev, and I'm curious to see what that team is going to be this year. I really am, because I actually think there's really good talent on this SMU team. I think getting Kevin Jennings back to form late in the year was important. Miami has the number one receiving core on their schedule. I think SMU is second. Jalen Cooper, I think, is going to be a breakout player. Getting Yannick Smith out of the transfer portal was good. They've got Jalen Hale, former Alabama receiver, out of the transfer portal. Yannick, they have Ymir Knight and Yannick Smith. Ymir Knight last year had 54 catches for 600 yards. I think he's a kid that came in from JMU initially. He's a good player. Yannick Smith came in from East Carolina. He has over 1,000 yards the last 2 years, 69 catches. Like, there's talent there, and I think Rhett Lashley's a good football coach. I think he's done a really nice job at SMU. They have, I think, both their tackles come back this year as well. There's some reshuffling on the D-line and the interior of the offensive line, but they got the running back from Cal, the big physical running back from Cal that they had some problems stopping in their late season loss. But, dude, they're getting upset in the last game of the year. Lost. If they beat Cal last game of the year, they're in the ACC championship game, Trev. Like, they were a terrible loss at the end of the year away from once again playing for and probably winning the ACC championship and making a second straight playoff berth.
Yep.
And yet still they are a top 20 team, barely top 20 team in the preseason top 25. So they haven't sold people on them yet. Right? That's fair to say. So I think this is a big year for SMU and for Rhett Lashley to show, like, hey, guys, I don't know why you think we're a fluke, but we've done enough the last 2 years to prove that we are not a fluke. We are a legitimately really good football team and one of the 2 or 3 best teams in the ACC. Actually, one of the 2 best teams when you look at it overall. And so I think that's what's in front of me. I mean, look, this is an SMU team, Trevor, that if you look at kind of what they've done the last couple of years, I mean, they've beat some pretty good football teams.
Yeah, they
last couple of years. I mean, they went on the road in 2024, beat Louisville. I mean, that was a big win. They went on the road and beat Duke. They, beat TCU convincingly. They had that 3-point loss to a really good BYU team last year. They beat Miami last season, and they were the better team. I mean, it was a good football game, but they were the better team in that game. They went on the road and beat Clemson last year by 11. Beat Louisville again, blew out Louisville. So they've got some impressive wins the last couple seasons. So I think this is a good football team. How good, that's going to be a question mark that we're going to have to see get answered, Trev. But I think this is I looked at 8.5 as their went over under, and I was a little surprised by that, to be honest with you.
I was too.
I look at their schedule at Florida State, at Louisville, at Syracuse, at Stanford. That's their non-Notre Dame road games. Their home games are UC Davis, Missouri State, Boston College, Virginia, Cal, Virginia Tech, Stanford. They don't play Miami. They don't play Clemson. They get Virginia Tech at home. They don't play Duke, who was the reigning champs. They do play at Louisville, but that's the only top level ACC team that they really play, and that they play on the road. I would be a little surprised if the under hits on this. It would be a disappointing season for SMU, in my opinion, if the under hits on this, because they actually have a lot coming back on offense. They do have to rebuild their defense a little bit, but they've shown that they can go to the portal and rebuild that thing and be a good football team. So I think SMU could very well be, and I won't be shocked if they're, in fact, the second best team on the Notre Dame schedule, not BYU.
No, it wouldn't surprise me either. BY or SMU season is going to come down to how well they answer these three questions. First and foremost, for me, in my eyes, if you can put together a really solid defensive line, because as of right now, all four starters are projected to be portal guys.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a big fan of when entire units are made up in a starting lineup of portal players, especially when we're talking about trench play. We'll see how big of a factor that is, how well they're able to answer that question, number one. Number two, what do they do on the left side of their offensive line? If I remember correctly, their left tackle and left guard are gone. They're talented guys. I think I read somewhere that they're going to reshuffle some guys around because like Josh Bates comes back. He was their starting center last year. Addison Nichols, he was their right guard last year, and PJ Williams was their right tackle last year. Be interested to see what they do.
Football player.
He is, man. So I've read some things where they might move him over to the left side, depending on what that looks like for him. Then the third biggest question is, can Kevin Jennings continue to rebound from that playoff loss that was still clearly haunting him in the first part of 2025? Now, he put that behind him, but he can't have any regression. Yeah.
In that game. I mean, he missed just wide open guys. Like it was a really rough performance. Really rough performance. And he had that look a lot early last season. Now he still put up some numbers, but it was you could tell he was still a little bit shook by that. It was pretty obvious that he was still a little bit shook by that. So, Trev, I think what's going to be interesting when you look at this SMU football team, it's can they put it together consistently? That's really my big question mark. Can they consistently play to their best level? That is what I want to see. That is what I want to know. Can they consistently put it together? Because they haven't been able to do that so far. They haven't been able to week after week be the best version of themselves. I think if they can do that, I think this team could end up being pretty good, to be honest with you. I think there's talent there to work with. Like I said, I like their skill talent. I like their quarterback. I think there's a lot of things to like about this SMU football team. It's just they haven't always been focused. Now, why is that? Is that a coaching mistake? Is that a problem with looking at it from standpoint of, is it the culture isn't as strong as it, there's a lot to look at for this. A lot to look at.
In sticking with questions, the final team that Notre Dame plays in 2026 is the Syracuse Orange. I have a rough idea of what the previous 11 teams that we just talked about this schedule, to varying degrees, I have an idea of what they're going to do this year.
Yep.
I can't tell you what Syracuse is going to do, genuinely. I mean, a lot of attention goes to Steve Angeli coming back off of injury, rightfully so, especially because of his performance against Clemson and what he did.
And how bad they were once he got hurt. Like immediately upon losing Steve, that offense.
Off a cliff, 100%. Now, here's the questions that I have with Syracuse. None of his supporting cast comes back that he had early in 2025.
Yep.
Yassine Willis is gone. His Daryl Gill and Jonte Cook and Justice Ross Simmons, his three main targets are gone. Dan Villari at tight end is gone. His left guard and right tackle are gone. So, it's just I have no idea what to expect from Syracuse. They have one of my favorite head coaches, up-and-coming head coaches in Fran Brown. I'm a big Fran Brown guy. Now, I think that he's the right guy for the job to try to turn a program around like Syracuse. Just the biggest question is, like, can he? Like, will he? Like, that's just – Syracuse is the biggest enigma on the schedule for me, because if you held me at gunpoint and were like, tell me what Syracuse is going to do this year, I would not be able to answer. I couldn't.
Yes. They also took some chances on some portal guys. They had some interesting pickups. Like, I don't know what their offensive line is going to look like, Trev. I really don't. They went out and signed a 5-star receiver. They got Calvin Russell, the third big-time player. I think one of the outlets had him as a 5-star. And then he goes out there and tears his Achilles in spring practice, which just like sucks. That'd have been like a big 6'5", fast, player for them. I look at this and I'm like, I don't know how he's going to be. They got another kid from a portal who was at a JUCO last year, started his career at Boise State, was at 3 years at Boise State, never played a snap. I mean, never caught a pass. I don't think played in a single game. Then he goes to Glendale Community College and has 59 catches, 961 yards, 15 touchdowns. They signed him. Like, who is he? The kid that was great at the JUCO, or is he the kid that like never played a meaningful down? I don't think at Boise State. And like, what are the reasons for that? Like that, I don't know the answer to that question. You know, like there's just so many of those type of question marks that I look at and say, boy, there's some athletes there, but I don't know how good they're going to be. You know, they got the Cole Weaver kid from Miami of Ohio, you know, had a good year last year, Miami of Ohio, 45 catches, 642 yards, 6'3", 220. How's he going to perform in that offense? You know, I don't know the answer to that question. They got a kid from Penn State, you know, who never really played a meaningful down as a true freshman last year at Penn State, but he was a 4-star prospect coming out of high school. You know, there's so many of these what if scenarios with Syracuse that you just don't know who they are and what they're going to be.
And that's just on the offensive side of the ball.
Exactly. Oh, I don't think they're going to be good on defense. I'm just assuming they're going to be bad on defense, and it's just whether or not they can outscore people. That's really where I'm at with this Syracuse team. Is can they outscore people? And then also, how's Steve's health going to be? I mean, Achilles injuries can be a little funky. And so, you know, how's he going to battle back? But like you look, obviously numbers in a quarterback system are about like your numbers that a quarterback puts up ultimately are about your system. You know, CJ Carr threw for 2,700 yards last year because the way that the Notre Dame team was built, that's all he needed to do. If CJ Carr is the starting quarterback at an air raid team last year, who's, you know, like 8-4, he would have put up way better numbers. Like, right. So numbers are a result of your system. So I don't really care that Steve Angeli ranked here in yards per game. Here's where you knew that Steve Angeli was impactful for them last year. Not because he averaged X number of yards per game or do this number of touchdowns. It's look how much things changed when only he went out immediately. So yes, his production on a per yards, per attempt basis, attempts per game, is driven by the system. But the system stopped working when you simply remove Steve Angeli from the equation.
Yep.
And that tells you a lot about the system still needs, right? Like it needs that trigger man to get the ball where it needs to go to. And when Ricky Collins replaced him, the offense fell off a cliff. Immediately, Trevor. It wasn't like over the next 5 games, Syracuse just, you know, they weren't the same team. You know, eventually teams figured it out, blah, blah, blah. No. It was immediate. They had, in the 3 games, his last 3 games, they had 377 yards and 26 points against Tennessee, 27 points and 461 yards against Connecticut, 620 yards and 66 points against Colgate, 433 yards and 34 points against Clemson. Steve got hurt. 26 points, 27 points, 66 points, 34 points in a road win over Clemson. They never had another game where they even got to 390 yards. They only had 3 games where they had over 300 yards. And they never scored more than 18 points in a game in the next 8 games when he got hurt.
Yeah, that's rough.
That's real bad. What's real bad? Now, how good will they be with Steve there? That's the question. Because last year they had some legit weapons to throw. Darrell Gill Jr., Jonte Cook, they're all gone. Their running back, where'd their running back go? I forget where he transferred. He transferred as well this offseason. That's my concern is, will Steve be kind of left with a barren cupboard, right? I mean, Trev, you could be a great chef, but if you walk into somebody's house and all they have is a box of Rice Krispies and cottage cheese, you're pretty limited on what your options are for making a nice meal that day. You know what I'm saying? Like,
oh yeah,
it ain't good. That's my concern for Syracuse. I just don't think they're going to be a very good football team. Now, their offense may score some points, but I still think they lose a lot of games. That's my read on Syracuse. And I think that's why SMU is sandwiched around 2 games that Notre Dame should dominate. And the other thing, too, is the odds of Notre Dame overlooking Syracuse are slim to none because that's the game they have to win to ensure wherever they're going to be in the playoff. They're either 10-1 and they've got to win that one, or they're 11-0 and they've got to win that one. The only way you could look at it as a concern is if they're like 9-2 and they're outside the top 12 and the players are just kind of checked out.
Yeah.
But then there's much bigger issues. Much, much bigger issues. So I think they're going to really struggle.
I do as well. We've kind of talked about it. Boston College being the trap game in this quarter, SMU being the runaway favorite as the toughest opponent in this. As we kind of wrap this up, Brian, and bring it to kind of a conclusion, how would you rank the 4 quarters in terms of like the most difficult quarter to the least difficult quarter?
I think the best quarter's a no-brainer, and that's quarter 3. That's the BYU, Navy, Miami quarter. I think that is one of the most challenging quarters that anybody's going to play this season, outside of maybe 4 or 5 teams that have just crazy gauntlets. I mean, you're talking about 2 potential playoff teams, and arguably, I mean, this is not outside the realm of possibility. That quarter could have 3 playoff teams in it. And that's not just Brian Driscoll's opinion. I've seen plenty of people that have Miami or SMU or Navy in the playoffs this year.
Yep.
I mean, Navy could be the G5 representative. Miami's, I think, likely a playoff team unless they just choke the season away. And then, now with Texas Tech's quarterback issues, BYU's in the conversation for winning the Big 12. And no matter what their record is, if they win the Big 12, they're in this year.
Yep.
The way that the new rules are. There's a world in which you play 3 playoff teams in that quarter. It's not even close. I think the second best quarter is more of the debate. And the debate to me comes down to quarter 1, which is Wisconsin, Rice, and Michigan State, or quarter 4, which is Boston College, SMU, and Syracuse. I'm actually going to go with quarter 1 next because none of those teams are as good as SMU. Not even close. But I think you could argue all 3 of those teams are going to be better than Boston College, and 2 of the 3 teams at least are going to be better than what Syracuse is going to be. If Syracuse is even midway between what they were last year and what they were the year before, then I think 4 jumps up next for me. So the gut reaction is 4's the second best because of SMU. That could be the second best team Notre Dame plays. But the other 2 teams I think could be awful. And I also think, and this also comes down to how you determine whether or not I'm right or wrong, or I shouldn't say right or wrong, you agree or disagree, because I don't know if there's really a right or wrong. It's all subjective. If you agree or disagree with me about quarter 1 being next, it's going to come down to how do you view Michigan State? Like, are they going to be the bounce back team? So for me, I think Michigan State's going to be a bounce back team this year. I think they're going to be better than a lot of people think. I think Wisconsin's going to be better than BC or Syracuse by a lot. I also think Michigan State's going to be better than BC and Syracuse, potentially by a lot. And I don't think Rice is going to be a great team. I think Rice is going to be a solid G5 team, or G5 team. Not compared to Notre Dame. I'm just talking about the quarters. And that's why I have quarter number 1 next, and I have quarter number 4 is third. And then the worst quarter, I think, by far is quarter 2, which is the Purdue, North Carolina, and Stanford.
We have the same exact order. I also have Q1 as being the second most difficult for a couple of different reasons. One, for what it means for Notre Dame. They have consistently struggled starting fast in a season. And they have to go out and do that against competition that I believe is going to be a little bit better than what some may think. Yeah. Q1 is also filled with teams that Notre Dame, when they're evaluating, they don't have a whole lot of film to go based off of what these teams are going to do, in my opinion. Whereas Boston College, they've seen Bill O'Brien at Boston College. They've watched Rhett Latchley and Kevin Jennings and guys like that at SMU for the last 2 seasons. And they have film on what Steve Angeli's done at Syracuse. I'm not sure what they're going to do, what Wisconsin is going to do this year. Because, Luke Fickell's been there. I believe they're going into year 2 of this offensive coordinator. But their portal acquisitions lead me to believe that the offense is going to look different. You have bigger running backs. You have a dual-threat quarterback. No idea what Rice is going to do this upcoming season. And then Michigan State, Alicio, the quarterback, comes back. You have a completely new coaching staff there. You don't know what they're going to do offensively or defensively. And so I think for those reasons, on top of everything else, that's why I had quarter 1 as my number 2. So we have the exact same order, man. I'm with you. SMU is the best team of those 6.
No,
but
no question about it. Yeah,
yeah,
by a lot. It's just you could argue that 2 of the 3 worst teams you play this year are in quarter 4.
without a doubt.
Now, I think the worst team you play this year is in quarter 1. That's Rice. If but I don't know. Like, we'll have to see how Rice is this year. But I mean, would you be shocked if Rice gave Boston College a game if they met on a neutral field? I wouldn't.
No, I would not.
So that's where I am. So I think that that's why I struggle with quarter 4 because of SMU. SMU is what makes that quarter hard to evaluate.
Yep.
Because I think they're going to be really good. But you also get them at home. I think that kind of factors in a little bit. We're like another thing that adds to how good quarter 3 is not only is it 3 really good teams, but 2 of those games are away from home.
Yep.
You play in Gillette Stadium against Navy, and then, of course, you play BYU on the road. Now, you do have a bye in there, which is nice. But I think that's something that pops up for me as a potential issue as well. I do like the fact that 2 of your last 3 are at home because the road game is the last game, meaning there's no next week to travel to.
And you don't have to change time zones to go do it.
Right.
Like, you don't have to go out to the West Coast for the final game. You're going to be playing in Eastern time. There's no time adjustment that you have to make for it either.
And it's the East Coast technically because it's in New York. But if I remember correctly from when I went to Syracuse, I believe Syracuse is in Western New York, though. Or like central-ish, but like Western New York. Am I correct? It's like Central New York. So it's not like it's on the coast, like playing in Boston or New York City, that kind of thing. Save you a half hour, 45 minutes of flight time. So it's an interesting schedule, Trev. Very interesting schedule. There's one team on the schedule. I want to ask you this before we leave. That you think could be the biggest surprise, good or bad. Who would it be? Maybe do good and bad. Who would it be?
The biggest good surprise, I'm sticking with my guns and being consistent. I think it's Wisconsin. I think because they've had 2 lackluster seasons, back-to-back years where they're not bowl eligible, wouldn't surprise me if they ripped off a 7-win season and were 1 game ahead of being bowl eligible. I think they'll be more competitive than what people think. So Wisconsin will be my good. My bad surprise, I'm going to go with BYU. It's just like, I'm high on BYU, and I think that environment is going to be a very tough place to play. But I have concerns around their perimeter skilled talent. They're relying on a lot of young guys. I mean, I think the Tiger Bachmeier storyline is interesting. We'll see what JoJo Phillips can do. Walker Lyons is somebody that came in and had a good spring for them, the transfer tight end from USC. But what they do in the trenches on defense and how their perimeter talent's going to be, I think they have a favorable schedule. But right now, I think the toss-up for who I think the second best team on Notre Dame's schedule could be, right now it's between SMU and BYU. There's a chance that by the time November rolls around, it's SMU and it's not overly close.
I agree with that. The question that I have is going to be, is it because SMU's just that much better than people think, or is it because BYU's not as good, or a combination of both? I could see a world in which BYU's a pretty good team this year, goes 10-2, 9-3, is top 25, and they're not as good as SMU. But I could also see a world in which SMU goes 9-3 and they're still better than BYU.
Yeah.
That's the worst case scenario for Notre Dame's schedule. Worst 100%. Case scenario. Trev, BYU, the other thing is I don't have them as my disappointing team, or the biggest, not disappointing team, but surprise in a bad way. But I also look at them and they've won a lot of close games where you're like, dude, their margin for error is real thin. Like they're not a team that you're like, boy, they're a play or 2 away from really being. They're like, it's more like, dude, you needed overtime to beat Arizona last year, and you needed overtime to beat, or you needed late game heroics, to beat, this team over here, and you struggled to beat Colorado, and you got blown out by Texas Tech. You ended up beating Cincinnati by 12, but it was an ugly game early on. UCF game was ugly early on. You look at 2024, and you had a great win at SMU, but SMU played terrible and still almost beat you late in the game. You barely beat Baylor that year. You beat Oklahoma State by 3, who stunk. You beat Utah by a point. And you look at, say, not that they're like a couple plays away from being 5-7, but like that 10-2 looks a whole lot different when it's 8-4 in a couple of those games. And do the breaks continue to go their way with not only losing players, but then also losing coaching? The reason that I think BYU keeps winning, though, is they got 2 portal pickups on offense that I really like. Walker Lyons, who I know you're real high on, and I'm real high on at a high school. And not, I don't know. Let me make sure that I'm clear here. I don't know that you're high on him or not, but you relayed to me that you've heard some really good things about what he did this spring at BYU. And then Kyler Casper is a kid that signed with Oregon, who I liked out of high school. Big, tall kid, vertical player that brings an element that I don't know that they had last year. And I'm very curious to see if he could – he's a wild card for them because he didn't do a whole lot at Oregon. But if he can go there and maybe turn and be the player that I thought he could have been coming out of high school, that gives them a much different look. So Walker Lyons and Kyler Casper, to me, could be the keys to their offense being good enough for them to legitimately be a playoff team again this year. So I'm very much looking forward to that, Trev. But but that's going to determine whether or not they are that kind of disappointing team or they are what we expect them to be. I don't think there's no, boy, they were better than we thought they were going to be at BYU, because they're a borderline top 10 team. The team that I think is going to be the surprise, and this isn't going to surprise anyone because of how I talked about them during the shows, I think Michigan State's my good surprise. I think they're going to be a good football team this year. In that 6-7 wins, I do. Chief Brody made the comment, and he said, we talk a lot about Michigan being coached by incompetent people. State was right there. That was the biggest shock for me. I liked Jonathan Smith a lot at Oregon State. I thought he did a great job there. He was a really good offensive coordinator at Washington before that. To watch that team be so incompetent the last 2 years, I did not see coming. I was floored by that. Pat Fitzgerald's going to bring back some toughness to Michigan State. That's for darn sure. That's the one thing you can guarantee. What are you going to say, Trev, about that?
Yeah, no, I was going to say to your point about John Smith. I mean, it's just, and he had the talent to be good. I mean, that's what's so crazy about it. I'm very curious to see what Michigan State does this year, and it would be great for Notre Dame if they end up being a surprise. I have no doubt about the toughness of the team this year. I'm with you.
Yeah. Now the negative surprise, Trev. I mean, it's hard because some of the teams are so bad that it's hard to know. Like, okay, well, I mean, is anyone going to be surprised if BC stinks again or if Syracuse isn't good again?
That was one of the reasons why I went with BYU, because it's just like I don't think SMU's schedule is. Yeah.
The one I'm going to go with is, I don't predict them to be down, but I think a team that could be a surprise, doesn't bounce back and ends up collapsing, is Wisconsin. And it comes down to, what you talked about earlier, is if Notre Dame smacks them, and that's an if. Notre Dame's got to go out and prove it. But if Notre Dame smacks them, the question is, how do they respond?
Yeah.
Do they just kind of sleepwalk the next 2 games and then they get smacked in Happy Valley by Penn State, and then they, I'm right about Michigan State being a bounce back team, and they go up to Camp Randall and knock them off, and then they go out to LA and get beat by, or Pasadena and get beat by UCLA, and then USC just out talents them. And now we're in a world where they're like 3-5, and then they just quit on Luke Fickell, or he gets fired, or whatever the case may be. Like, Wisconsin is not going to be, in my opinion, 5-7 this year. They're going to either be improved and be 7+, or they're going to just tank and be 3-9.
Agreed.
Or worse. Like, I don't think there's going to be any happy medium in Wisconsin this season. That's how I see it. So they're on my, I don't know that they're going to be this way, but they're the only team that I look at that we're really expecting anything from. The only other one, and I hate to say this, and I'm sorry, y'all, I still love you, the other one's Navy. Like, Navy just has always had these weird years when they lose a lot off their offensive skill. Quarterback's gone, fullback's gone, best receiver's gone, slot back is gone. That they have that year where they kind of take a big step back and then rebuild again. And I worry that that's what Navy could be going through this year. I hope not, but it is a concern. It is a concern.
Well, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the Irish Breakdown Podcast. IB Nation Sports Beat goes live in a little bit over an hour. Interesting topics of conversation for them tonight. They're talking about and posing the question, is Notre Dame a college football villain? And if you haven't gotten enough Syracuse and Steve Angeli
Bring
talk,
it. Bring it. I want more of it. Yes.
Here's hoping. Be very interested to see how they answer that question. And if you haven't gotten enough Syracuse / Steve Angeli talk, They also talked to a Syracuse insider about the outlook of the Orange season this upcoming season. Upcoming season? You guys get the point. Brian and I will be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Like you said, we are starting on the midweek rundown, diving into the opponent previews. It's going to be a segment that we do here. Not going to want to miss tomorrow's show. On your way out of this show, be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends, family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame college football as much as you do. But as always, the best way to support what we do here and the best way to stay in tune with everything Notre Dame football is be a premium message board subscriber at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Until tomorrow, that's Brian. I'm Trevor. See you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.